On today's show, I'm going to be talking with George Heftler, and he is the host and creator of the Best Little Horror House in Philly podcast, which is, I think, a little twist on the Best Little Horror House in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Good movie, which hopefully they'll do a horror remake of someday. But he also has a really interesting format where he invites people on his show and they talk about their favorite horror movies. I'm going to turn the tables today and let George talk about his favorites today and ease in a couple of surprises. So welcome to the show, George.
Hey, happy to be here.
Don't you hate it when people say, and a few surprises?
No, I actually love surprises.
Well, you're always the one, driving the car. So how does it feel to kind of sit back and be the guest today?
You know what? It feels great, to be honest. Especially because, on my show, so much of the preparation is hands off on my part, where I don't pick I have literally no say in what movie we talk about. So finally, I get the chance to really be the one to determine the movies that we're chatting about.
Well, I think when I first saw you online and we communicated, I looked through your podcast episodes and I kept thinking, oh, if I was ever on this show, I'd love to do this movie. And then I saw someone did that. And I thought, oh, I'd like to do that movie. So it seems like already you've covered so many movies that I love in the genre.
Yeah, we've gotten to talk about some really great ones, and yet I'm still always surprised that at like a lot of the tentpole sort of horror movies haven't really been picked in terms of like your Halloweens, your Friday the 13th. The closest we've had is Alien and Texas Chainsaw are like the only one of the big, mainstream sort of iconic horror franchises. But we've gotten to talk about some really, really great movies, even ones that I hadn't seen previously or even heard of, that, people get a chance to talk about the movies that they love and why they're special to them. I just love getting to hear about why people are passionate about these movies. And if I get to, find a new favorite, that's, icing on the cake.
Well, I've always had this theory that, there's this golden time in your life to discover horror movies. And it's usually when you're coming of age, you're an adolescent, becoming an adult. And after that, you can still be frightened by horror movies, but they will never affect you the way that the movies affected you when you were a teenager and becoming an adult.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, though, that what makes that interesting is that because I am able to kind of move past that, I'm able to look at them in a little bit more of an analytical light. And, I think that is its own interesting reward as well, in addition to, just being scared. But I definitely agree, when I think back about how scared I was of horror movies as a teenager and everything, and even beyond that, when I was a little kid, the way that I got scared off of horror as a very little kid was the It miniseries. And it doesn't help when the first kill is a little kid named Georgie. It's like, you know what, this is enough for me. And so coming back to it later and exploring it as a teenager, and then sort of dipping my toes in that way, and then coming back to it now in my mid to late 20s, it's really interesting, sort of the reaction that I've had in different stages of my life, for sure.
And I think generational, the generational thing enters into that too, not just what age you discovered it, but, with, say, the original Halloween, 42 years old now.
Right.
And I'm sure a lot of the people you talk to weren't even born then. And I think it's not so much that we don't have access to it, because we have access to everything now. But I think there's still a generational thing of not accessing everything they can.
Mm-hmm.
I think people still take cues from their friends or say, hey, have you seen this? And I think that it's also, even with people being so aware and having so much access, they still cling to just a few. And it's really, I think, hard to pull someone away to find the truly obscure stuff and to champion that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Especially unless someone is making like a concerted effort, it can be really hard to be like, oh, I'm going to go back and visit these things, because there's just so much getting put out all the time. You know, I basically, in order to try and watch all the movies that I want to watch, I have had to almost abandon TV in its entirety. And I still don't get to watch everything that I want to watch. So in order to, yeah, go back and be like, oh, I want to watch some of these classics, or I want to do, do a little bit of a deeper dive into some more obscure stuff, you have to really be like, I am actively going to do this, as opposed to just letting it come to you like a lot of these, more modern recommendations might.
Well, we're going to go deeper into this in a bit, and I'm going to definitely age shame myself because I'm sure I'm a bit older than you. But it's kind of fun to talk about, I think, that. And maybe you'll turn me on to some things I don't know about. Maybe I'll turn you on to some movies you've never heard of.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I just want to learn a little bit more about you, and not just, how you got into horror movies, but when did you first start your podcast? Again, best little horror house in Philly. Awesome title.
Thank you.
And, in the time you've done it, what have you learned? And, maybe what direction do you want to take your podcast now that you've had a year or so under your belt?
Yeah, so I have been doing it for a little over a year now. We started in October of 2019. And I guess what I've learned is that even movies that maybe I don't connect with on an aesthetic level, where I'm like, this really isn't my like style of movie that I like. I in particular am not really into like found footage stuff. But usually what I've learned is that these movies connect with people because there is something to them. Even if it's not a movie that I necessarily connect with 100%, there's always something for me to latch onto and to talk about in a positive way. Part of the theme of my podcast is that I agree with the guest on whatever movie that they picked, that's the best horror movie ever made. And I sometimes have to fake it a little bit for something like Paranormal Activity got picked, but even though it's not necessarily my actual favorite movie, there's so much like cultural context to it, and when a movie hits so big like that, there's always something to latch onto, whether it's thematic elements or just the way that it like shifted the window of horror for so long. And so I guess what I've learned is that even if it's not something that I love as like a straight up movie, that doesn't mean that I can just write it off as being, having no value, because these things do connect with people for a reason.
Well, I think that's a productive approach because we live in an era where there's so much like false controversy and people just disagreeing with each other just to draw attention to themselves.
Yeah.
And I think as a fan, it's just more fun to hear two people talk and look for what they like. It's obvious, even if we like something, we can find fault with it.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we don't like a movie, we can often find elements we like about it.
Right.
We live in such an all or nothing culture. But I'd like to get your take on just the whole, the current form of critiquing movies and especially horror movies. And I would include a lot of that is YouTube. Like, I don't know if you watch a lot of YouTube movie review channels, but, there's channels with just one person, looking into the camera, talking about a movie, maybe showing a few clips, showing the cover. Maybe they're a collector and they're really proud they found this old VHS.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's just a few bros sitting around a mic drinking beer and, trying to be, I don't know, the next big thing. And at a certain point, it kind of veers off from it's less about the movie and more about the people trying to show how cool they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on how do you stay in your lane? Meaning, how do you at least try to do service to the movies you're talking about and not just make it totally about your personality?
Yeah, I think that that's a really great point about sort of where horror reviews kind of sit right now, and not just horror reviews, movie reviews in general. I have a hard time with reviews like that, where it's just people kind of talking around in a circle and sort of just circling the drain of the movie or whatever. But to the same point, I mean, I the part of the whole reason of why I started doing this show was because you're right that there is so much of this like all or nothing contradictory for the sake of contradicting sort of approach. And I find it really frustrating, to be honest. It's such a negative breeding ground of like just people not getting along. I know that sounds really dorky to be like, I just want everyone to get along, but it's the truth. And, you know, you see on like Twitter, everyone is yelling at each other and everyone's got to have the hottest take. And I love movies. I love watching movies. I like talking about them. And, you know, originally the idea was I was going to talk about the worst horror movie ever made, according to our guest, at least. And I was just like, I don't want to do that to myself. I don't want to be watching bad movies all the time. I don't want to be crapping on things constantly. I'd much rather bring sort of a positive conversational element um to what people are doing. And I think that people have responded to that in a good way, because even if it's, like I said, a movie that I'm not super connecting with, the guest is there because they love that movie. And probably someone else also loves that movie. And so just giving someone a platform where they don't feel like they have to soft sell it, where they don't feel like they're going to be attacked for liking the movie, I think really helps people bring that passion and talk it out. And I think that those like sort of solo 2 camera reviews tend to lose some of that. And there have been plenty of times when I have come out the other side liking a movie more because of the conversation that I've had. And if you're just reinforcing your own opinions, it can be really difficult to sort of evolve as a reviewer, as a viewer of that individual movie, all these things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember back in my day, again, I have to age myself, but take the 80s, like when Siskel and Ebert were really popular and there were so few outlets to review movies, especially on TV. And, you know, if there's an art house film or, you know, a mainstream Hollywood film, they would give it a fair shot. The rare time they would review a horror movie, they immediately had this extreme bias against it. Like they wanted to hate it, and they just thought these were filthy, you know, just horrible, you know, abominations. Why would anyone make one of these? And so now that we've gotten to the point where there's a lot of outlets that review horror movies and want to like them, and that's the whole difference, is that I think you should send a reviewer to a movie who wants to like that genre.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, even just this year, where it was, I think it was like Variety or maybe Vanity Fair or something. They like put out this article of like top 10 movies for people who hate horror movies. And like it was a list of horror movies put together by someone who at the top was like, listen, I hate horror movies. I think they're trash. I think that like people who make horror movies are bad people. And so here's like a list of things like for people like us. And it really sort of puts like an us versus them mentality that keeps horror sort of uh in a different level on people's minds. And I think that there are plenty of horror movies that exist on the same level as many other classics. And you know, I totally agree. I think that Ebert in particular is sort of the villain of Best Little Horror House in Philly because that guy really just had it out for horror. And you know, he's a great writer to be sure, but he could get nasty. And in movies, you know, like Blue Velvet, where he talks about Isabella Rossellini being degraded and David Lynch's misogyny because of it. And like Isabella Rossellini was like, I'm an adult. I decided to do this movie. Like, I don't need you to be my father. Um, yeah, I agree that it should be people who want to like the movies who go out to review it. And I understand that that's not always economically feasible for some of the bigger. Well, no, you know what? It definitely could be. Forget that. It could be feasible because they're a big outlet like that. Basically my point is that I think that people who are invested and immersed in the genre are able to bring a lot more um, context to the film in a way that is to the reader's benefit.
Well, I'm still pissed off with Roger Ebert for dissing Deuce Bigelow 2, European Gigolo. I
Damn
love
you,
those
Roger.
movies. Yeah. In fact, I have to admit, I like most Rob Schneider movies. I like his humor. But,
Oh yeah.
anyways, Roger Ebert, he's passed away. And, except for these blind spots he had, I think he was a good reviewer. But again, I think most reviewers should just admit they have blind spots and maybe kindly say, hey, this isn't my thing. Someone else should review this. I'm not going to really come in with a clean slate for this.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, here's one thing I'm going to ask you real quickly is, as someone who loves, all types of horror, and we kind of touched upon, bad horror, good horror. I've kind of gotten to the point now where people are saying, oh, it's so bad, it's good, kind of horror movies.
Right.
And I'm at the point where I just want to say, if you like it, it's good. Why do you even have to say it's so bad it's good? Because there's obviously something working there, and there's so many bad movies that are just boring. I still think there's some talent within those so bad movies.
Yeah, I mean it's tough because I love those sort of movies, your Tammys and the T-Rexes and your Extras and stuff like that. And um it's tough. I kind of go back and forth on it because I think that part of why I like those movies is because of the flaws in them. There's a million pounds of heart in those movies, and the passion is really where the difference lies for me. But I think it can be important to be like, in terms of execution, maybe it's lacking. But yeah, I think that it's more about sort of the enthusiasm behind it that makes it a good or a bad movie, as opposed to just how it sort of turns out on the film,
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of times fans or audiences, they want to feel this superiority, like, oh, this inept filmmaker, this is trash, but it's so bad it's funny. Where I think in some of those situations, the filmmakers knew something of what they were doing.
Yeah.
They weren't totally blind to what was happening to their movie while they were making it.
Sure. A lot of times it's just a budgetary issue. I mean, I just recently watched Scary Tales, which is kind of like a creep show
Mm-hmm.
knockoff sort of thing. That's a SOV video from Baltimore. And I loved it. I really loved it. And, I watched a bunch of the special features and everything. And this guy gets on screen and he says, I know how it looks, but it's also not like a lot of people have this impression of, oh, it's just three guys kind of screwing around in their backyard for an afternoon. And that's not the case. We worked really hard on getting the script together, finding locations and everything. And yeah, we only had $500. And I think it looks pretty good for that $500. And frankly, I kind of agree. Just because they aren't able to execute it to the top of maybe where it should be or where it could be with more money, that doesn't mean that the people are entirely inept when they're composing sort of where the movie should go.
Well, it's like that movie Showgirls, which is considered this cult classic now. But, 25 or so years ago when it came out, I remember watching it and, it just got ripped apart in the reviews. And I thought, this is entertaining. I can see why they're ripping it apart. But even then, it didn't take like years to reappreciate it. I knew right then and there, wow, this is pretty campy, and wow, this is over the top. And I think the filmmakers knew that to a certain extent.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
I mean, how can you, I don't know if you've seen it, but like the the show within the show. You know, they're on stage doing that Vegas music review goddess with the volcanoes and the half
Right.
naked dancers. I mean, they obviously knew, you know, that was pretty over the top.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, plus, it's interesting when a movie like that, you kind of get to bring your emotional baggage to it, where like, I'm watching Kyle MacLachlan up there, and I'm like, oh man, I've seen this guy in Twin Peaks, and I've seen him in Blue Velvet, and I've seen him in Hamlet 2000, and to see him sort of in this wild role in this wild movie, even elements like that can sort of enhance the fun for me.
Well, I want to move into some of the fave part now, and what I because I know it's impossible to pick one favorite horror film, and I hate that
Right.
question because then I think about it for weeks and go, "Oh no, it should have been that. Oh, I forgot about that." But I'm gonna do three for you. Let you talk about them a little in depth. Then I don't want to talk about ones you hated, but I like to phrase it this way: uh, to give me a couple where you were disappointed, like you
Okay.
really had expectations. You know, maybe it was a director you loved, and you just had high hopes, and there's such a good cast, or this or that, but then it fell short. So not that you hated it, but it just didn't live up to your expectations. We'll do two of those, and then I will ask you a non-horror related movie question. How does that sound?
Sounds great. Let's do it. All right.
So, what's your first just all-time favorite, the one you don't even have to think about, horror-wise?
It would probably be Psycho, to be honest. I mean, it holds up so incredibly well. I think that Anthony Perkins puts in the best performance in a horror movie that I've ever seen in that movie.
Now, see, that's a good example. That was something I'm assuming came out before you were born.
Yes.
So, when did you first see it? What first turned you on to Psycho?
Psycho, I actually saw for the first time in my high school film class, I believe. Um, and I just loved so much about it. Even then, all these years later, it was probably like 2010 or something when I saw it. I don't know, maybe a little earlier than that, but it was like I still was falling for the twists and turns and everything. Everything was still so effective. Um, and it really blends these incredible elements of sort of like the noir detective stuff with Loomis looking for it and this great performance that I said, and all of the things that might age it, like the chocolate syrup or whatever, um, they just don't really detract from it at all, in my opinion. I think that it really just sort of exists as this monument in horror history. And it's so good. And I think that when you look at something like the Gus Van Sant remake, and it just serves to really reinforce how incredible the original is. Um, it looms so large in so many people's minds, and I think with good reason.
Well, that's a good comparison because that was almost a shot by shot remake, same script.
Right.
And it shows that casting and chemistry is such a big component in a movie, the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And, to me, even say the story's not as good in a movie, like one good performance, like one unhinged, just out there performance can make a movie for me, even though it's lacking in other parts.
Yeah.
So for Psycho, did that lead you to want to watch more Hitchcock?
Yeah, it definitely did. I like a lot of Hitchcock's other work. I do think that Psycho stands out for me as the best. But I also think that what's interesting is there are some like adaptations of things similar to Psycho that still really work for me, like Santa Sangre, the Jodorowsky like semi adaptation of Psycho. I think is also really good, and I just think that there's a lot of material there to work with. Psycho 2 is
Okay.
also very good, I think.
Yes.
Shockingly.
Well, I'll age shame myself again. I saw Santa Sangre in the theater when that came out.
Oh, nice. It's
But
really great.
And isn't it a treat to see those movies on the big screen?
Yeah.
So, well, the thing about Hitchcock, even though he's so connected with Psycho, most of his movies were not so out and out horror.
Mhm.
He's considered suspense, but one that people never talk about that I think is his most out and out horror, which, I would consider one of the early slashers, is Frenzy.
I actually haven't seen that one.
You haven't? Oh my God. Well, you must promise me to see that then.
I certainly will. But I mean, in terms of his horror output, I mean, The Birds is also really great.
Hmm.
Even stuff like Vertigo, where it's sort of like a hyper specific horror. It definitely has more of that like suspense thriller aspect. But if you have a fear of heights, it could certainly get pretty scary.
See, one thing about Hitchcock is he always looked very refined. In his movies, always had this Hollywood, Technicolor, big budget look, except for, black and white Psycho. But he still had sort of a classy look where you felt like this is still Hollywood.
Yeah.
When he ended up making Frenzy, it looked cheaper, it looked sleazier. It was,
Mm.
I think, unlike anything he had ever done. And it was all about this serial killer who and then I'm trying to remember this right. I think he killed people with neckties and strangled them.
Ooh, sounds
A-
good.
Yeah, and instead of kind of talking about the murders, they showed them more. And that's such a big thing about horror is how much they choose to show of the actual murders.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that it can typically I would say that the imagination is a very strong tool. And the less you show, sometimes that can be really effective. I know Alien and Jaws are like classic examples of, just kind of hang back and wait on it. But on the same sort of, or rather on the opposite hand, you have stuff like Misery where they like show the hobbling and it really is as the foot goes floppy and you're just like, oh my God, I can't believe they showed this. Or I just was watching Bong Joon-ho's The Host again, and in the commentary he talks about how he wanted to get the monster on the screen early so that people weren't wondering what the monster looks like. They can focus on sort of the impact that it's having. So
Mhm.
I kind of go back and forth in terms of it being like a case by case basis, but by and large, I think that if you are confident enough to show it early and show the kills in detail and stuff like that, that confidence can really carry you a long way.
Mhm. All right, moving on. Horror favorite number two.
I would probably, man, this is still tough, even going with three. All right, I'm gonna say Reanimator as my number two.
All right. Very excellent choice, which you can probably guess I saw in the theater when it first came out.
Very nice.
So I'm gonna probably be a broken record on all that. Just don't mention any silent films from the 20s.
Okay, I do love
So,
The Invisible Man, but that's in the 30s, not the 20s.
so why do you love Reanimator?
I think I love Reanimator for a lot of the reasons you were talking about with Frenzy, where it's really like kind of sleazy and like grimy looking, and it's funny, but it's not. I think that it's funny because of the delivery and because funny people wrote it, but it's still very much focused on the horror elements of it as well. I think that the special effects in it are just out of this world. And I mean, this is not going to be a hot take, but I love practical effects. And a movie that is wearing their love of practical effects on their sleeve, like Reanimator, that's an easy way right to my heart.
Mhm. And again, I'm just so impressed that at the time that was released theatrically, because so often movies like that were almost like a full moon, direct
Yeah.
to video kind of movie. And just that this somehow got out there. And, wasn't Stuart Gordon, the director, didn't he go on to direct a lot of full moon movies?
Yeah, well, they worked with Charles Band and Richard Band on even Reanimator. Charles Band helped to distribute it, and Richard Band did the score. Although he utilized a lot of Psycho's score, the Baz Luhrmann one, in that theme. But yeah, it is sort of like I think what I like about stuff like that is that these smaller directors and producers and everything sort of group together with their horns out and they circle the wagon a little bit and they say, we're going to make this work. Our group is going to work together and teamwork makes the dream work and we're going to get this done. And, they work together frequently in a way that sort of feels like a theater troupe. I know Stuart Gordon worked in theater for a long time, and so it's not surprising to me that he sort of had this stable of actors that he tended to work with in terms of Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton and everything. But I love when directors and their actors sort of can build that relationship. You look at John Carpenter and Kurt Russell. You look at Tom Savini and George Romero and all of those Day of the Deads and Dawn of the Deads and everything. When you can find a group that really works together and executes well, I just love seeing them come back together again and again and again.
Well, he really did bring great actors there, and I think I give him a lot of credit as a director for getting the tone right, because it could have veered too far off on being campy and funny. He still scared you while still making it this vibrantly colored, almost like a creep showish thing, but never at the expense of still keeping it a horror movie.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Well, I like that you like that. It also makes me think at the time, I think before Full Moon, I think Charles Band was still doing Empire.
Yeah.
That was his, and I think one of the last theatrical releases they had pretty close to this time was a movie called Dolls. Do you remember that?
Yep.
And it's incredible thinking back now that actually got a theatrical release.
Yeah, some of these do kind of shock me, and it's funny that when I'm doing research for some of the movies, when you look into like how many theaters they open up to, and you sort of see like, oh, it just had this like dinky little release, and then it had to sort of build this cult following. I'm always so happy for them when they manage to do that. Reanimator opened up in like I think it was like 400 theaters or something like that.
Not bad for its time, yeah.
And you compare that to something like the December before that released was the first time that a movie opened up on 2,000 screens at the same time with Beverly Hills Cop. And just when you're like, I understand how something like that would hit it big, but the idea of something like Reanimator being able to hit it big, it really brings me a lot of joy.
Right. And of course, I do have to add, I did see Dolls in the theater when it first came out.
Very nice.
But the other thing I'll say is that it was like a more of an art house theater, so it was smaller. So they probably knew, it could support that, but maybe not a multiplex theater.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this was right around when multiplexes were really starting to come into their own. I know in between 1981 and 1984, they just stopped building like single auditorium theaters. And I think that it was a positive for movies like Reanimator getting to sort of get their time and get a better chance to get one of those theaters, but also the homogenization of these multiplexes sort of coming under the chain, the chain way of doing things. AMC was one of the first multiplexes back in, I think in Kansas City they started, and that homogenization can sort of have a negative effect on movies like Reanimator getting a spot, because you start saturation booking these movies and all of a sudden everywhere you go it's the same 10 movies or whatever playing.
Oh my God, you're bringing back a lot of memories. I remember the first multiplex I went to, and get this, it had 2 theaters in one. That was like considered a really big deal. Okay.
Yeah, man.
2 in 1. And the movie I saw, 1975, summer of 75, was Jaws.
Oh, hell yeah.
Can you believe it? Packed theater. But what really gets me is the preview before Jaws was The Omen. And
There
I
you go.
remember just seeing that, and that soundtrack and just that ominous demonic chanting.
Yeah.
And I thought, just watching that preview, I was so frightened. I almost couldn't even stay for Jaws. I was in such a mood, although I was probably, I don't know, 11. But I just remember that that was a phenomenon that we could see or have a choice to see more than one movie in one big theater.
Yeah, I remember the day that my town's single auditorium theater became a multiplex as well, and it was a big deal. It was a really big deal.
Yeah. Well, number 3. So we've got Psycho, we've got Reanimator. I hope you're going to throw a wild card at me here.
I think I will, because I was tempted to say The Thing, because body horror is still one of the few sort of things that really scares me still. But I'm gonna say The Witch, the 2015, I think it is. Yeah,
Mhm.
2015's The Witch. I just love it. I think that it's sort of, it's not the first of this like new wave of art house horror, but I think it is one of the best executed forms of it. I think that it demands your attention and it forces you to engage with it on its level, not just because of the aesthetic, but also because of the language. And they're speaking in like the old English. I think that there's so much going on. The performances are just really incredible. The look of it is great. And it really allows you to engage on it, or engage with it on a thematic level as well. I know there are a lot of people who argue back and forth about horror having something to say or whatever. And I think that The Witch is sort of like the peak example for me of a movie that is discussing something while still executing on a horror movie level.
Mhm. Well, when you think of horror wanting to disorient you, by placing it in that place and time, just having an environment that would be foreign to a modern audience,
Yeah.
it already kind of puts you into this hypnotic, like, wow, this is anything could happen, or what's hiding out in the barn. Just it kind of magnifies that. Like if you're a city person and you've never been on a farm, already you're just kind of disoriented about what's hiding in all those shadows.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you picked a real classy one. I was really hoping you would pick like a really trashy one, but that's okay. We'll move on to trash a little later.
Well, I almost picked Brain Damage from Frank Henenlotter as well. So there's your
Another good
there's your
choice.
trashy one of my favorites.
He's great just
I love
because
Henenlotter.
going into his movies, he's always going to deliver.
Hmm.
He's great. Okay, let's move on to 2 movies, horror movies that just disappointed you. You had your hopes high and you got let down.
Number one that I'm gonna say is probably Veronica, that the new Van
Ah,
Dancing movie.
a
Uh,
lot of people were talking about that online.
yeah, I wanted it to be like what you were talking about earlier, one of those like so bad it's good movies, and I mostly just found myself miserable. Like, it's
Oh
just
no.
really, I didn't have any fun with it really. There were like a few moments I laughed, but just in terms of sort of that competence level, there were so many scenes where it felt like they just let the camera running, and like in order to have some room to edit, and then they just were like, "Oh, we don't have enough footage," and they just were like, "All right, just leave in the entirety of the scenes." And so there are plenty of times where people are just standing there looking at each other, and you're like, "All right, let's transition now," and they just don't for like several seconds. Just really awful.
See, one thing I wonder about that, when you put out your first film and you're just so publicly kind of, thrown under the bus. But say you do have, this kernel of talent, and if you made more, you might get better and more fully realize your vision.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever like feel bad that maybe Danzig could make better movies in the future, but this response, may prevent him from pursuing that?
I don't feel that bad for him, to be honest, because he's already a success in one field. I think that there's a little bit of hubris in being like, you know what, I'm gonna dive into this other one as well. I certainly think that he would be a fine producer if he was like, I have these ideas that I want someone else to execute. But in terms of sort of bringing things together, I mean, there are other people I'd rather see do that sort of thing.
All right. So, disappointing movie number 2.
Okay, so a similar sort of director. I'm gonna say Rob Zombie's Halloween.
The first one,
The first
second,
one.
both.
Well, first of all, yes, both I hate, but but really the first one in particular is the only movie banned from my podcast because I just don't think I could bring myself to fake enjoying it for an hour. There's just so much of it that feels like a spit in the face to the original. Whether that's taking 30 minutes to get to where the original one starts, whether that's showing Michael's backstory in the first place. Part of what makes Michael so scary to me is the fact that he was just any other kid and that he is pure evil. And so when you spend 30 minutes showing him getting bullied by Junie from Spy Kids, I'm like, this does not help me to be scared of him. And then and he also, Michael talks later in like when he's in the therapy and everything. And that sort of feels like it's just not Michael anymore. And then on top of that, the way that they handle Laurie Strode is just abhorrent to me. I understand that he's doing his own thing. And, there are people out there who like that movie, and I am happy for them. But to me, taking Laurie Strode, who in the original is this shy girl who is afraid to even ask out Ben Tramer to the dance. And the first time we see her in this remake, she comes down the stairs and makes a joke about having sex with her teacher for an A. And it's just so different. And it just feels like him being like, if you liked the original, I don't want you to enjoy this. And it worked because I didn't.
Wow. See, my take on this is I didn't so much mind the backstory part. I just didn't like it being in a Halloween movie because the backstory part was very much in line with his House of a Thousand Corpses and, his original stuff. That belonged in that universe, and he does that well. That's kind of his genre, what do you call it, redneck horror, or
hellbilly, I think he's called it before. And I have no problem with his other stuff, the House of a Thousand Corpses, all that jazz. I think is fine. It's not my favorite, but I think it's certainly his own vibe, and he's doing his own thing, and I gotta respect him for that. But to take a beloved property like Halloween, I hate to be the guy who's like, you're ruining my childhood, but it just feels like he's actively trying to subvert what the original is in a way that isn't to the movie's benefit. And I agree that if he had just made this movie as its own thing and not attached the Halloween name to it, maybe I would have reacted better to it. But I just don't think that Halloween, it's so clinical and sterile, and that is what makes it scary in the original. If he had done like a Texas Chainsaw remake, I think that fits to his aesthetic much better.
Very much. And yeah, like you said, if they just taken off the name Halloween, didn't have, to change Laurie Strode's name to something else and the name of the town.
Yeah.
Because that little kid he got to play the young Michael, I thought he was a good actor. And just, who's the guy that played the father?
I don't even remember. I've blocked out his face.
Yeah, he's kind of he does a lot of, he shows up. He was good, but
Yeah.
yeah. Well, another recent movie remake that I kind of thought the same thing on was the Suspiria remake, where they veered so far from the original and the director wanted to put so many of his new ideas in.
Hmm.
At times it just stopped resembling the original, even though I liked a lot of the effects he achieved and there's a lot to like about the movie. I just didn't like that he latched it onto the name Suspiria.
Yeah, I mean, I almost wonder how much of this is them and how much of it is just the studio being like, well, we need a name to bank it off of. I mean, it gets really frustrating to constantly have these remakes getting put out and everything. But you know what? I'm not the one making the money decisions. So
Well, give me your opinion on Cabin in the Woods. Did you like it, hate it, or were you just disappointed by it?
I like it. I would say that that was actually one of the movies that kind of brought me back into horror, because I think it is a comedy with horror elements as opposed to a horror movie with comedy elements like Reanimator. Um, and being able to have those jokes coming so fast and thick, um, as a scared little man, it was helpful to me to have something constantly right around the corner in terms of comic relief. Um, I think that it's a movie that likes horror movies, and for that I have to give it some credit. I think that the performances in it are pretty fun, even if it's I don't think it's the best horror movie, but I think that in terms of movies made for people to be like, yeah, I like horror movies and I want to just like do this homage to the genre in general, I've certainly seen worse.
Mm-hmm. See, ever since Scream, when people are so self-aware of the
Yeah.
genre, and dare I say, the word I hate, tropes, the horror tropes, that there's this whole generation of people who they can't make a movie without analyzing the movie while being within the movie.
Right.
And there's this whole, it's not just movies, but it's music and culture. It's so self-referential. At a certain point, we
Yeah.
can't just rely on referring to old things without creating new things.
Yeah, I think there is a level of irony poisoning that's going on. Um, and it can get frustrating, to be sure. I agree that people who can't commit to the world, I understand that you're making a silly horror movie. I don't need you to constantly be winking at the camera and be like, yeah, I know it's silly too. I know you know it's silly. Just make the silly movie.
Mm-hmm. Because and again, back to Rob Zombie when House of a Thousand Corpses came out, which I saw in the theater. But I was the first of my friends to see it. It just kind of slipped in under the radar, and maybe I saw it like the Friday night it came out. And I remember saying, wow, I have not seen a horror movie like this in quite some time. This is not trying to appeal to, the Dawson's Creek crowd or, have pretty teenagers as the leads. This is ruthless and
Yeah.
gritty. And oh my God, it is almost grindhouse. I remember telling people, wow, you got to see this movie. It just really struck me as original.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I mean, like I said, when he's doing his own thing, I can't bag on Rob Zombie too much because he's going out there, he's making it happen, and I respect it. I really do. It just when it veers into this, I even think that this like remake obsession culture is sort of part and parcel of that irony poisoning where everything has to be a reference to something that came before, and they're worried about, will people go see an original property, and they think that, okay, we'll just slap the name on it, and that'll be enough for people. And for me, I need more than that. I need it to not just be in name only a reference. If you're going to be remaking it, there needs to be thematic similarities. There needs to be something there.
Well, wouldn't it be total justice if in 10 years somebody remakes House of a Thousand Corpses and just totally messes with it?
They make it just really clinical, like it's very methodical. That would be really funny. I would laugh.
Wouldn't that be?
Yeah.
Take that, Rob Zombie. Okay. Let's take a little detour to our non-horror question, which is, first of all, the question leading up to it is, Wes Craven or Wes Anderson? Who do you like better?
That's Wes Anderson easy for me, to be honest. I love Wes Anderson.
Why did I know that would be the answer leading into our why do you love Wes Anderson so much?
I think on a purely aesthetic level, I think I really connect with him a lot. I love the like symmetry and all that stuff. I think that he sort of falls into that same thing where he reuses a lot of the same actors and everything, and he has that relationship with them, and he knows how to use them correctly. And he's not afraid to take risks and be weird and do things that aren't for everyone. I think that I don't think that he's put out a bad movie. I think there are ones that I connect with less, but I think by and large, he's pretty much knocked every single one out of the park in terms of making the movie that he wants to make.
What do you think of art house directors who decide, oh, I'm going to dabble and make a horror movie, just my little horror movie side project? And I guess I'm thinking of Jim Jarmusch. Didn't he make a zombie movie?
He did, and I got like an hour into it, and I was like, all right, I get it. And then I just kind of kept on getting it for another half hour or so. And I think that sometimes that sort of dalliance into horror can feel a little smug. And I think that movie in particular does feel that way. But I also think that sometimes it can be hard to get a horror movie made in terms of finding someone to sign off on the idea, because horror is so high concept. Like as a genre, you really need to have like a hook. And if it takes someone, having to build their reputation a little bit, but they actually do like horror, I'm thinking of Jordan Peele in particular right now, where he sort of came up in comedy, but the whole time he loved horror. And then he finally got his chance to go out there and make these horror movies after building up a reputation and sort of an ability to direct comedy and work in comedy. I think it can work as long as they don't feel like it is a side project. If they view it as something that they actually want to do, I think it can really work well.
Tarantino has hinted that he wants to make a horror film.
I would love it. I mean, I also love Tarantino. I understand that he's problematic at times, but I think that he's a really talented director and a really talented writer. I think that in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that scene at the ranch is already like a glimpse at a Tarantino directed horror movie, and I think that it would be spectacular.
And he did write From Dusk Till Dawn.
He sure did, and I like that movie a lot. And I also think that his role in that movie is just Quentin as himself. I don't think it's really a character.
And that's, I think, a good example, that movie, directed by Robert Rodriguez, of taking movies you love. Like that had such almost, a Western feel, everyone down at the saloon, the isolated outpost, and then all the monsters. But what I like about it, it showed a knowledge of what came before it but it didn't act superior. It just gave you a very straightforward narrative. They
Mm.
just, got to the business of making a coherent cause and effect movie.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely respect them for that. I think in his age, Tarantino sometimes does get a little indulgent with his references and everything, and I think that Robert Rodriguez really helps to rein him in that movie in terms of having a second voice there. And I think that that movie is really great, and I love that everyone gets to have fun in it. You know, George Clooney is in there having a ball, and Harvey Keitel is doing his thing. I think it's a great movie.
Yeah, and I think you're right that Rodriguez reeled it in. If Tarantino had directed it, I can only imagine. Although it was still pretty bloody with Rodriguez, but wouldn't
Right.
it be just interesting if we could compare how Tarantino would have directed that same script?
Yeah, I mean, I almost wish that someone would just throw the money at him and be like, go do it and go see what happens. And I just think that sort of thinking about those like parallel worlds where someone else got a crack at it is so interesting to think about sometimes.
Well, when we're talking about art house horror, I think one group of filmmakers that do it just naturally and effortlessly are the classic Italian horror directors, the
Oh yeah,
Giallo.
hell yeah.
And the thing about those movies are they are sometimes a little incoherent, which adds to the art house kind of vibe, but they're beautiful to look at. I mean, the art direction, you can tell that these people really want to make something visually beautiful, kind of like a Wes Anderson.
Oh yeah, I mean, Deep Red almost was one of my answers for favorite movies. I think it's great. I think that Argento is great. I think Bava is great. I think Fulci is great. I mean, they again, it's sort of like they're making the movies that they want to make, and to me, that is just the surest way to get me to at least be on board most of the way with your movie. If it doesn't feel like the studio is in there meddling, if it feels like this is the statement that you want to put out there, I can usually get on board with it. I think it's part of why I connect with David Lynch movies so much, where it's like he had an awful experience with Dune in terms of the studio sort of sticking their fingers in the pie. And after that, he said, I'm never doing this again. I need to be the one who makes this artistic statement. And it needs to come from me. And I think that that level of surety in his statement and his work, it comes through. It really does. And when you have someone questioning it constantly, whether it's a studio producer or whatever, um, that lack of confidence comes through to the screen as well, and it does pull it down, and you start to get these differing tones and different voices in a way that doesn't work as well as something like Tarantino and Rodriguez working together.
Well, I think another thing that makes some of these Italian horror films approach art films is just their own weird story logic. It's almost
Right.
like magic realism where not everything has to make sense. They can just have some weird vibe or just some weird supernatural interaction that they don't necessarily have to explain.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at Phenomena. There's got a chimp helping him out, and she can be psychic and talk to bugs, and you're just like, okay, I'm on. I get it. This is the movie that we're watching, and I love that. I think that sort of putting you in a different world is such an exciting thing that a movie can do that a lot of things can't.
Right. And Guillermo del Toro, I kind of think of him as almost like an art film horror director.
Yeah, I would get behind that. I think that he he sort of is like, why does it need to be only one thing? Why can't I have a romance movie and a monster movie in terms of The Shape of Water? Or why can't I have a monster movie and a sci-fi movie in terms of Pacific Rim and stuff like that? Or even Crimson Peak is another. It's a melodrama and a gothic horror, and these sort of genre blending things that he does I think work really well because he is so passionate about all of it.
Exactly. Well, we're going to move into our final stretch here, and we're going to make it trashy. But before we go into that, I always forget to ask guests about themselves. So, besides loving horror, doing your podcast, hopefully with the quarantine, probably calling up Grubhub drivers to bring you lots of Philly cheesesteaks. How do you spend your time? And do you live right in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I do. I'm right in West Philly. Born, well, not born and raised, but I was about to reference Fresh Prince. But um, what do I do? I paint with Bob Ross. I used to watch a lot of Bob Ross with my grandfather, and then a couple years ago, he sort of had a big revival, and I started watching it again. And you can only listen to him say anyone can do it so many times before you're like, you know what, Bob, you're right. Let's get this going. And so I have a lot of paintings around the room that are poorly done, but they're mine.
Very nice. Do you ever paint? I know there's so much fan painting. Like, do you paint Freddy Krueger in finger paints or just anything horror related?
Um, so I semi recently got like a drawing tablet just so that I could like doodle on my computer. And one thing that I found myself having a lot of fun with is like doing alternate movie posters and stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I'm not very good at it yet, but I have fun with it. I did one for Onibaba, the Japanese sort of like ghost samurai movie, and it was a lot of fun, and it's a fun challenge, but I wouldn't say that I really get into the like painting Freddy or Jason or whatever kind of thing.
Now, do you collect horror movies on like VHS or DVD?
Um, so for for a long time, I had like a huge DVD collection. And then when Blu-ray came out, I really felt like an idiot where I was like, this is objectively better. And my DVD collection now feels worthless to me. That's not the case, and I no longer feel that way, especially because so many things don't make the transfer to Blu-ray, and so it can be hard to find some things on Blu-ray because it takes a lot more money to put the effort into making the transfer and everything. But I do collect horror Blu-rays and stuff. I don't. I'm the kind of guy who, when you collect stuff, I like them to be out. I have a lot of like horror toys and stuff, and I take them out of the box and everything. For me, the things are there to be used, and so I mostly collect Blu-rays now at this point. But the horror aspect of it certainly is the largest one.
So, what are the most prized videos in your collection?
Oh, good question. I have the like Twin Peaks Z to A collection, and
Nice.
I just love it so much that I mean, I literally took like 3 days to go through all the special features.
Don't you love special features and just like, especially like commentaries?
Oh, I love it. I will not buy a Blu-ray if there's no commentary track on it.
Yeah, and isn't it great to find an older movie and somehow they track down the director or some of the actors in it and, from 30, 40 years later and actually got them to do a commentary?
Yeah, I think that that is great because they kind of come to it with the benefit of seeing how it panned out. Something like Scary Tales, which I mentioned before, it's this little dinky $500 SOV video, and they tracked down the director and they said, please come and talk about it. And it's just really fascinating to hear him talk not only about the process, but also sort of how he views it now, all these years later, in terms of whether he's proud of it or not, in terms of how making it affected his life. Um, that sort of revisit, I think it can be really, really interesting.
Do you like shot on video horror of the 80s and 90s?
I would say that that is something I am getting more into. I like it a lot. You know, I'm going from something like your Henenlotters and whatever, and who directed It's Alive? Why is his name escaping me?
It's a
Um,
lot. Larry Cohen.
yes, Larry Cohen. You know, you get sort of these kind of guys, and you sort of connect with them, and you're like, all right, what else in this sort of oeuvre can I get my hands on? And eventually, you start making your way to SOV stuff, and I think that there is a real charm to it. A lot of the time, again, a lot of what connects for me with a movie is just feeling the passion behind it, and the advent of the home camcorder really opened up the floodgates in terms of people being able to make their own movies. And the fact that these people were passionate enough to go out there and to buy the camera and to buy the tape and everything and to get their friends together and make this video, there's almost always a lot more passion that you can feel in a movie like that than you can in a big budget studio film.
Now, when you were a kid, did you gather your friends together and shoot little horror movies on home video?
No, I actually didn't. I was a very bookish kid. I mean, I had friends, but I spent a lot of my time reading instead of making videos.
It'd be so funny because especially the current generation with the really good cameras on iPhones, the people who are just growing up knowing nothing but pretty decent equipment, right at their fingertips.
Yeah.
But to think of, back to your childhood or our childhoods when we think, okay, what did we have back then? What didn't cost $50,000 just to get, the equivalent of just a high-8 camera now.
Right. Yeah, it really is crazy to think about. I mean, what that movie Unsane was filmed on an iPhone. Like,
Right. That
it's
was a
just
big
wild.
director. Wasn't that a Steven Soderbergh?
Yeah, it's Soderbergh. Like that's incredible to me that you're able to make like a studio movie on an iPhone. Now that's just wild. You keep this thing in your pocket and you can just pull it out and be like, all right, time to make a movie, which is
Right.
it's just fascinating to me. I mean, obviously he has all kinds of lenses and stuff for it. It's not like he literally just pulls it out of his pocket, but I think the point stands.
Right. And boy, a lot of audio sweetening in post-production.
Right.
Well, it's still kind of in its infancy. Can you imagine 50 years from now what the technology will be like?
Oh man, I can't even imagine. You know, they say science is or magic is just science you don't understand is a famous quote, and I'm sure it will seem like magic whatever we get 50 years from now.
Maybe in 50 years we can type a screenplay and feed it through a machine, then out the other end will come the finished movie.
The dream. Although actually, I don't even know if I would like that because the going out there and getting it done, that's half the joy to me, and I recently talked about this on our episode about Panic Room, where it was so meticulously scripted out because of the digital effects that they did that the cinematographer wound up leaving. They had to get a different cinematographer because they couldn't come to an agreement on being able to improvise on set. And that sort of brings a warmth to it, I think, when you're able to be on set and see how people are interacting and really sort of use your human judgment in a way that I mean, maybe in 50 years a computer will be able to match that, but I don't think that that's the case now. That warmth. So I don't know, maybe I will have changed my mind in 50 years, but I certainly think there is a benefit to the human element.
Well, there's so much nuance throughout a film, especially in a performance, but there's just a million artistic decisions being made.
Right.
So, any one of those decisions can also move the movie into a whole new direction.
Definitely.
Well, okay, we got to get into the sleaze now.
Let's do it.
But no, these are very good responses. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, have you ever been on a movie set?
I was an extra on a Colin Farrell movie that I forget the name of, but it was shooting in Philadelphia, and I was an extra for that.
Oh my goodness. And now my go-to question when I hear stories like that is, did you see Colin Farrell go to the craft services table? And if so, what did he eat?
Unfortunately not. He was the like shot was like he was up in a building and like the window like shattered out and then it was like a crowd shot from below. And I was simply in the crowd. So unfortunately I did not get to see Colin. Although Colin, if you're listening, I'm a big fan.
See, if I had been through the trauma of a shattering window, I would just binge eat. Just get out of my way. Where's the table? Okay.
Crafty, bring me Crafty.
Well, because I know so many people who are into horror either used to be amateur filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers. And I think a lot of times people try it and they realize this is a lot of work.
It sure is. It sure is.
Even making a bad, low budget movie is a lot of work.
Absolutely.
But thank goodness we have those preserved. Okay, so, and again, I don't even know how old you are. I keep assuming, you're like young enough to be my grandson, but I don't think I'm old enough for that, and I don't think you're young enough for that. But for so many people of the current generation, people in their 20s, they tell me they've never been to the drive-in theater. So first, have you ever been to the drive-in theater?
So that is tough because of living in a city, but recently, it's been a year now, basically. I visited Austin, Texas, and I went to my first drive-in theater there on Friday the 13th to see Friday the 13th.
Nice.
It was wonderful. I had an absolute blast.
Now, how recently was this?
Like March, early March. I went I went for South by Southwest, and then South by Southwest got canceled, and I was like, well, I'm already in Texas, so I might as well just hang around for a little bit. It was like right before COVID really was like people understood how big it was. I wound up actually like canceling the trip. Like I cut it short because I was scared I was going to get stuck in Texas. So it was like really right as things were transitioning and ramping up into what we are in now. But I am glad that I got to go even for a couple days.
And it's so great that your first one was Friday the 13th.
Oh yeah, I love that movie. I love that whole franchise really, except for 9. We don't have to talk about Jason Goes to Hell, but I think that it is the most consistent by a long shot of sort of those major tentpole franchises.
Well, so you think about the drive-in movie theaters, they were for horror, action, and like sex comedies.
Right.
These softcore little sexy, I don't know even what, there's not even an equivalent nowadays. But usually titles like God, what was this one? Lunch Cart Girls or something, or trucker movies in the 70s. Those were big at the drive-in.
Oh yeah.
But I think the whole thing about the history of sleazy horror goes hand in hand with drive-in movies and also grindhouse theater.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
let's face, I mean, you don't want to see a horror movie in a respectable theater.
Certainly takes away from the charm.
In '83, when I first saw Evil Dead in the theater, double feature with Christine.
Oh my gosh, what a double showing.
I know. And I think Christine was the main one, and I think they tacked on Evil Dead. And to me, it seemed new. It was years later I realized that actually I think was done in '81. So it actually had been around, but I'm sure it played, the drive-in circuit.
Right.
But what I loved about it was it's probably the closest Seattle had to a grindhouse theater. It was like this once really nice theater, probably a throwback from the 30s, the big movie houses that were just opulent. They almost looked like opera houses, and, they had balconies. But it had kind of fallen on hard times, and it was just, constantly showing a lot of exploitation films, which was great.
Yeah.
But I just remember, that atmosphere had a lot to do with the enjoyment of it. And not just that, but I think it just attracted, like, it was really cheap to go. So I think people that just, were cold on the street pay a couple bucks just so they could be warm for a few hours.
Yeah. I agree. I think that kind of thing is great. For one of the episodes of my show, we talked about I Drink Your Blood.
Hmm.
And, we get into sort of the transition from B movies, because they were called that because they were the second showing in drive-in theaters, to Grindhouse, and sort of how that transition happened and how it was in response to these art house theaters. And I just think that it's so fun and funny to me that like these producers would be like, all right, here's the movie, cut it into whatever shape you feel like you need to cut it in order to make it so that you'll show it, but we just want to get it out there. And so you get all these different like versions of movies depending on what like projectionist was screening it and everything. It really sort of feels like the grit of movie making and everything sort of really on display there.
Do you think part of it is like on the B movie, there's so little pressure? It's just like, do it within this budget. It's so insignificant. I don't even have time to meddle with you, that these filmmakers got this freedom to kind of just make a whacked out movie.
Yeah, I do think that that's the case. The more money that someone has invested in it, the more worried that they're going to be about, is it going to sell? And I mean, this is not even the first time I've said it on this show, but when a studio starts meddling, that's usually when it starts becoming less of an artistic expression and more of just a money-making machine. And I am happy to give my money to something that feels passionate and that is someone trying to express something of their own, whether that's just making a wacky, fun movie, or communicating some kind of message. I technically, I mean, people don't really consider it this anymore because it is sort of artistic, but Night of the Living Dead was a B movie and was considered an exploitation movie for a long time. And that certainly has changed in its in the way people view it over the years, but I think that it is sort of representative of what could happen if they let these directors just have free reign.
Hmm. Well, the first movie I can remember seeing in the drive-in was Willard,
Oh, hell yeah.
which not the Crispin Glover remake, but the original.
Right.
And I think that was about 1970, maybe even a year before. I can't remember the exact date, maybe 69.
Right.
And it was the kind of thing where, put the family in the car, and, for one price, the whole family could get in, to the drive-in and watch a movie. Of course, once they're in there, think, oh my God, what are we exposing our young children to? But they were probably just hoping the kids would fall asleep in the back seat.
Right. Hey, by the time it got to that second showing.
Exactly. But the one I really first remember as a teenager going to see with my friends in high school was The Incredible Melting Man.
Oh, wow.
Have you seen that?
One of my buddies has actually recommended it to me pretty recently. I haven't seen it myself, but it's people are talking about it.
Well, it's a perfect one to see at the drive-in. And what's funny is like going to IMDb and like hearing people review it. And they're just slamming it left and right. And it's like, come on.
Right.
A movie like that, you just have to take on its own terms. You can't compare it to a Hollywood movie with a budget.
Yeah, totally. Man, it gets really frustrating when people just aren't able to sort of apply the context of when it came out to the movie, and also the environment that it came out into.
See, a movie like that, to me, as long as it delivers on its promise, where we get to see an incredible man melting by the end.
Yeah,
And
I
it did.
agree. Yeah, exactly. And then what more can you really ask for?
Plus, there's a really cool scene where in slow motion, someone runs through a plate glass window.
Just like The Omen.
Oh my God. And I think the whole thing with that is the thing I appreciate more now with genre films, especially horror, even if they're not perfect, if they at least try to give you some thrills.
Hmm.
And I'm pretty easy. It doesn't take much to thrill me. But, someone jumping through the window, or a really cool car chase, or well choreographed fight scene, or, some really cool special effects makeup. I mean, that's what I think we go to genre films for. And we've gotten so much to the point of wanting everything to be socially conscious or to have such deep meaning.
Hmm.
Sometimes we just want some good splatter.
Yeah, I think the beauty of horror is that there is room for both. I think that no other genre really branches into as many subgenres as horror does. And that allows for an incredible variety of not only content, but like messages and tones and all kinds of jazz. It's part of why I love horror in general.
Well, I love the do it yourself aspect of it because it's something that a beginner thinks, yeah, I can do this. I can pull off some effects, as opposed to it'd be really hard as a young filmmaker to try a Wes Anderson film,
Yeah.
because then you have to, rent a really nice location and, hire $100,000 art director. But, a
Yeah, with horror, the
plucky,
shittier it looks, the better sometimes.
you just need a backyard, some fake blood, a hockey mask, and literally, I've even seen stuff made by kids on YouTube that are pretty entertaining and they deliver the goods, the blood, the Friday the 13th homages. There's just such a fun spirit to these.
Yeah, and I think that YouTube has really been a boon for things like that because of like the tutorials and stuff that are on it. I have the Tom Savini book where the Grand Illusions one where you get to like,
Classic.
yeah, it's classic and it's great and it's super fun to flip through. And if you don't have it out there, I recommend that you get it because even if you're not planning on making any special effects, it's incredible to see how they come together. But on YouTube, these kids can go and they can look up how to make fake eyes and fake guts and all this stuff. And the accessibility of information has never been easier. And I think that that is something that some people take for granted. And it's really remarkable to see how some people are able to take this information that is out there and put it to good use.
Well, I know in the fiction world, and I know Clive Barker likes this term, rather than horror, describing a lot of his work as dark fantasy.
Right.
And of course, he writes out and out fantasy too. But if you take that term to horror movies, dark fantasy, I think the fantasy element is such a creative part of it, meaning since these are speculative worlds in their own way, and we're creating these kind of mythological creatures at times, that
Yeah.
you kind of have free reign if you have a good imagination, with a small budget. As long as you have the imagination, you can create something pretty compelling.
Oh, absolutely. I think that you're so willing to disappear into the world that they're creating so many times with genre movies in particular. You come into it with a willingness to suspend your disbelief, to believe that these monsters are there, to believe that there's a killer hiding in the woods. And I love when people take advantage of that and really sort of swing for the fences. And I think there's a place for grounded horror in terms of it being legitimately scary. But I also think that sometimes it's not as entertaining as something that really sort of embraces those fantastical elements.
Hmm. Well, again, I don't know why, but I'm coming more back to just wanting a bare bones horror movie. Like if they're calling this movie a horror movie, I want it to provide the horror before it provides the other. the other layers they can add. But if it's not providing the horror, front and center, it's almost like they're miscategorizing it. It's more of a hybrid. Why did they call it, a dramatic suspense thriller,
Right.
And I think genre expectations are so important. And I think a lot of time as a horror fan, we get turned off when the movie doesn't fulfill the expectation.
Yeah, it can be tough for me because horror is so personal that I just want to write off the idea of genre, period. I'm like, you see something like what Bong Joon-ho does, where he just balances like five different genres in the same movie, and it all feels natural. It doesn't feel like he's shoehorning anything in. And those kind of movies make me want to go, why do things need to be categorized into one vertical? Why can't it just be all of these things? Um, but I think you're right in that if something is sold as a horror movie and then you go and see it and it's not that, they don't even really try, but it has sort of thematic horror, we'll call it. Um, it can feel disappointing and disjointed from what you've been sold. So I kind of go back and forth a little bit, but I certainly understand the frustration.
Hmm. Like I like Silence of the Lambs, but I think of it more as a thriller than a horror movie, even though it's, a lot of people consider it horror. And a lot of that is just the whole approach to it. It's obviously got some really suspenseful moments in it, but to me, it just doesn't follow horror. I wouldn't even say it transcends it. I don't think it's better than horror, but it more follows um, a drama. It's just a very tense, scary drama to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely understand that. I think it can get tough. I think something like Predator, I hear people argue about this movie all the time about whether it's sci-fi or whether it's action or whether it's horror. And I think it's all of those things, I think that it basically follows the pattern of a slasher movie, but it takes place during the day. And instead of, these weak camp counselors or whatever, you got these big strapping macho men. And that subversion is part of what makes it scary because you expect these guys to have a certain level of competence, and then it gets turned on them super quick. And you see that even for all of their guns and all of their muscles, they are helpless against this monster. And so it really kind of sits in all three of those for me. And when someone is like, it needs to be just one genre, I just am like, why? Why does it need that? And so it can get tough like that. I think there are some that, like Silence of the Lambs, I think is a good example where maybe the line is a little fuzzy on if it's horror or not. Probably might lean towards no. But if someone came to me and they were like, I consider that to be a horror movie because I was scared during it, I would be like, you know what? That's fine. I get it.
Well, one reason why I think the slasher subgenre is so loved and enduring is it has really rigid parameters to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some horrible trauma happened to someone at some point in their life, either as a child or young adult. Then they either go away to a mental hospital or they lay low until years later a group of teenagers, visit, or it's Halloween, or, there's just some, a good pool of potential victims to pick off.
Right.
And the fans love the creative kills.
Sure do.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, at least that genre is there. The subgenre of slasher is there for the people who want it. And that's where I don't want someone to transcend that genre. I just want them to do a really good job within those parameters.
Yeah, it can be frustrating. Something like what was that movie? It just came out. Jay Baruchel directed it. Um, incredibly violent or something like that. I don't remember the exact name of it, but it very much feels like he's trying to transcend that slasher genre and comment on it while also executing it. And because it's trying to discuss the slasher genre instead of just being a slasher, it kind of falls apart in areas. And, it's not the worst movie I've ever seen or even the worst movie I've seen this year. But I think it does lose a little something by not just embracing it.
Here's one thing. If you go to the horror conventions, you don't too often see tables or booths with self-aware filmmakers or people collecting self-aware horror film memorabilia.
Right.
The fans line up for the tried and true stuff that they love that's not talking down to them.
Very true. Very true.
I mean, you're a horror collector, in the end, we gravitate to just I think a few key things because they became iconic, and it's because they were original, they tapped into something, and those movies frightened us.
Yeah, I think you're totally right.
So I think we can always, bring the horror, back to the horror. Okay. So for your podcast, which I'll say again, because you can never say best little whorehouse in Philly too often. For all the people who have been on your show, the format of, they bring their favorite horror movie to the table and discuss why they love it.
Mm-hmm.
What is the trashiest, lowest budget movie someone has brought?
Oh, wow. Good question. I mean, we did talk about It's Alive, the Larry Cohen movie, and that was brought to us by my buddy Chris, who runs the Channel 83 podcast, which does focus on sort of the obscure and lower budget stuff. That's the beauty of the show, is that it really is all over the map. Let me pull up a list of episodes so I can take a look here.
Like, has anyone brought up Tourist Trap?
Not yet. I mean, this is the same thing as with not Day of the Dead, but Night of the Living Dead, where technically The Wicker Man is not just a B movie but a C movie, where it was the third in a in a set, and they managed to sort of escape that reputation, but it still is a lower budget and everything. We talked about Cube, which is just a movie that I love. I think it's great. Oh, I Drink Your Blood. Like I said, yeah, that's definitely the trashiest one.
Excellent. See, it's always fun when someone brings up something like that as their favorite.
Yeah.
Because to me, it means they're not trying to impress anyone. They like what they like.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, especially because I feel like it really lets us discuss it more. When someone brings Alien to the table, I love it. Certainly, I think it's incredible, but there's also an element of what can we say about Alien that hasn't already been said. But when someone brings something like I Drink Your Blood, or even like Cheap Thrills or something like that, it's not something that as many people have been exposed to, and so you can talk about it a little bit more in terms of what an experience it is in terms of the movie itself, and not just how it looms large in the culture.
Mm-hmm. All right. 5 wild card questions, and then we're going to wrap this baby up.
Let's do it.
When I say baby, I mean the It's Alive baby. And leading into the first question, and I normally don't like to rag on movies. Seriously, I can find something good in almost every movie, even if I don't love it 100%.
Mm-hmm.
I have such disdain for the remake of It's Alive.
I haven't even seen it. I was like, why am I going to do this to myself?
It came and disappeared too. It's probably hard to find. I think I saw it on DVD.
Yeah.
But so that leads me to question number 1. It's kind of a risky one. What is your least favorite horror remake?
I mean, it's got to be Halloween. I think the Nightmare on Elm Street one really gives it a run for its money in terms of terrible, but
Mhm.
the just for all the reasons that I mentioned before, Halloween just really sits wrong with me.
Even though I thought it was well paced, the Friday the 13th remake really veered so far off of the original. I mean, were they even considering it a remake, or was that just like a reboot in a different direction?
Yeah, I think it was more of just a reboot, and I think that the fact that they kind of cram the first three movies together, they're like, all right, you get these camp counselors, but then you get Baghead Jason for a little bit, and then he gets his mask and everything. Um, I think it was pretty interesting. I think I mean, it's not my favorite movie, but I think when you look at the other Platinum Dunes remakes, I think it is pretty distinctly better than a lot of the other ones.
All right, please tell me you hate the remake of When a Stranger Calls.
Didn't even see it. I said, why bother?
Again, it's like you just wonder why it was made.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it feels like a cash in, and I don't want to reward that kind of behavior.
You know, maybe if they called it something different and didn't tarnish the name of the original, I won't even get into that. This is your least favorite remakes, not mine. Okay. I noticed before you took off the video of our Skype call, you had that beautiful zigzag Twin Peaks background,
Oh yes,
which is the Red Room.
right.
That's what they called it. So please share me how you gained your insane love for Twin Peaks.
So I watched a few David Lynch movies, and they were good. I was like, these are good, but they weren't my favorite until someone picked Lost Highway for the podcast. And I watched Lost Highway, and it all just clicked for me. It all just kind of fell into place. And I said, "Oh, like this is it. I understand now. I see the appeal." And I went and I watched every single David Lynch movie, and I watched all of his shorts and everything as well, and I just loved it. And when quarantine hit, me and my buddies, we were all like, "What is something that we can do online that will allow us to still and feel a little connected?" And so what we did was sort of like a book club. We did Twin Peaks Club, and we would watch 3 episodes a week, and then we would meet to discuss them on Skype, and then we would watch the fourth one together online and like talk about it as we were watching. Um, and we loved it. We had so much fun, and I really think that it is one of those shows that really benefits from discussion and like, oh my god, what's happening? None of us had seen it before. All of us were had managed to avoid a lot of the like spoilers or whatever that would have sort of impeded our enjoyment. And so really coming to it fresh and getting to experience it with my friends, I just don't think I could have had a better experience with it. Even so, I don't think it's perfect in every single way when maybe David Lynch wasn't involved in some of the season 2 stuff, but I think even in the episodes that are not as great, there's always something to enjoy because it exists in this world that I think is really interesting. And then when you go to Fire Walk with Me and the missing pieces, I just think that it really puts an incredible cap on it in terms of establishing this world in a real way and making it about Laura's trauma. And I know we discussed about how, there's a lot to enjoy about a movie that isn't trying to say something and just be straight ahead and enjoy what it is. But I think that a movie like Fire Walk with Me, where it is managing to have something to say and also just absolutely scare me to my core at moments, um, is an experience like none other.
Mhm. Well, when I was researching you and especially your podcast and kind of trying to put myself in the shoes of your guest, thinking, okay, what would my favorite horror movie be? My first one I thought was Prince of Darkness, Carpenter.
Yep.
But then I saw you had done that on your show. I thought, darn it. Like I wanted to be so clever and think of one your guests hadn't thought of. Then I thought, okay, Legend of Hell House.
On
But I think
there.
someone did that too, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, what else? How could I stump him? And I thought, but what do I truly like? And then the next one was Fire Walk with Me.
Wow. I would love it.
And I got to think about it, and kind of goes contrary, to what I've been telling you and we've been talking about, in that it's very much a hybrid. It's not a straightforward horror film. It's almost an art film in places, and it just has, but it really creates a nightmare world really
Hmm.
well.
Yeah. I
And I love
mean,
the effect achieved. So when you said, the horrifying story of Laura, and that's just another example for me of just how the star power of Cheryl Lee and
mhm.
makes you so empathize with a character who's a very complicated character.
Yeah, I think it's a crime that she didn't have a bigger career. I think she is just so incredible in the show, in the movie. She manages to really bring this pathos that is so powerful. And it is a horrifying world, and it's so complicated. And I mean, when I read The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, which was written by David Lynch's daughter, um,
Hmm.
it it just brings so much background information that makes it all the more tragic, when she talks about sort of like corrupting Bobby. It just breaks your heart. It's just incredible. This world feels so real and lived in, despite the fact that it has these surreal and fantastical elements.
Well, just the tension with her parents at home,
Yeah.
both performed so well. But then when Bob comes in,
Mm.
that's truly frightening.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think it's just fantastic. In the missing pieces scene when they're in the room above the convenience store, and they're all just like all the people from the other world are just kind of doing their thing in there. Like that really is so unsettling to me, and for reasons I can't even name. Like I can't put my finger on why it really shakes me.
Yeah. And that whole, murder scene at the end, what are they, like
Oof.
in a mobile home or some
Yeah,
trailer? Just that whole setting and just how that was presented that was scary stuff.
definitely, definitely.
Oh. Well, again, do you love the soundtrack?
Oh, incredible. Angelo Badalamenti. Holy cow. What a talent.
Yeah, and again, I go back and forth between the two, but it's the Fire Walk with Me soundtrack that, I listen to the most. To me, that's it. Just, I don't know, that whole knowing what's going to happen. There's just so much of like a foreshadowing. Like you just know something horrible is going to happen just by listening to that music.
Yeah, I one thing that I would say is kind of my like most annoying habit for movies is that I have a really tough time with prequels a lot of the time because I feel like knowing where it winds up sort of saps a lot of the dramatic tension of the movie. But in the case of Fire Walk with Me, knowing the way that it ends up just really brings that tragedy to the entire movie. The whole time you see Laura trying to break free of this grasp of Bob and to have her own life and everything, and to just know the entire time that despite her best efforts that she'll end up dead wrapped in plastic. It's just it's tragic, really.
Okay, question number 3. What is the highest number of movies you have binged back to back?
Oh man, probably like 6 to be honest. I In 2018, I was unemployed for the month of January. And over the course of 2018, I watched 518 new movies.
Oh my
And
God.
Yeah, and it's a lot. I am proud of that, but also ashamed of it. And
Wow.
uh, you know, there was a lot of days where I would apply to a few jobs in the morning and then spend the rest of the day just watching movies. And a lot of that was because it is an escape into another world. And I didn't have to think about being unemployed or whatever. I could just spend the hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever living with these characters. So I would spend a lot of time watching movies.
You have a lot of stamina. That's a say they're average 2 hours each. Take little breaks. I mean, that's about a 12-hour stretch.
Yeah, well, I mean, I built that up because me and my friends every year we do the Lord of the Rings challenge, and what that is we start very early in the morning. We watch all three extended versions of Lord of the Rings in a row, and it's also a case race in that every person involved in watching has a 30 case of beers, and you have to drink all 30 beers by the time you've finished the movies. By the time,
30?
yeah, and I am the only person who has ever completed it, and I only did it once in the several years that we've been doing this. So
So
certainly is a
so
challenge.
so that's like 10 beers per movie.
Yes, but the trick is, here's the real trick, is that you gotta get them out of the way because Fellowship is a lot shorter than you think it is. And so, especially compared to the other two. So what I usually do is I'll do like a power hour right up top. And that knocks out like 7.5 beers in an hour. And then you can just kind of coast for a little bit. And it really helps. I'll tell you that for free.
Now, are you conscious for Return of the King?
It's hazy a lot of the time, that's for sure. um,
My God.
so yeah, so if you pass out or throw up, you are disqualified. And so, at that point, you can just kind of be like, all right, I lost, time to just watch the movies. But certainly, if you are deep into your run, it can the movie itself can sort of escape you.
Well, good for you. Hey, that sounds like the college fraternity experience I never had.
It's better
So,
than any fraternity, in my opinion.
the horror movie fraternity. See, that would have been fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, when you had that year when you saw how many movies was it in one year?
518. And that was just first time watches. I'm sure there were a couple rewatches in there too.
How many of those could you actually remember a year or two later?
Probably a lot of them. I mean, I don't know if I could tell you that I watched them in 2018, but if you were like, "Hey, what do you think of this movie?" I would be like, "Oh, I could probably remember a decent amount of it." Especially, it's shocking because not to shock anyone, but I indulge in some marijuana from time to time, and I have my medical card, so it's all above board, people. But you know, it certainly can inhibit memory. But I am usually pretty good about being able to latch on to stuff in a movie and remember it going forward. So I feel pretty confident about that list.
Well, marijuana is legal here in Washington State, so no one would judge you here.
Perfect, perfect.
Well, oh my God. See, with Amazon and Netflix and, all these streaming services, there's so much indie low budget horror. It sometimes it feels like there's like 50 new movies a month now on these platforms.
Right.
So even if you're binging day and night, it's so hard to keep up with them. I mean, can you really keep up with all the new releases?
It's tough. It's really tough, that's for sure. I mean, I've been lucky this year in particular to be able to go to a lot of virtual festivals, and that has helped to sort of sort the wheat from the chaff, as it were. But it can get challenging, to be sure. I rely on a lot of word of mouth stuff. It helps to have friends who you know and trust their taste. Um, but it gets overwhelming for sure.
Well, now that you host a horror movie podcast, what kind of responsibility do you think you have to keep up with new horror, or is it just enough to know the classics?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's tough, because you need to understand the history of horror, I think. And I think that is more important than being up to date on every single new release. Especially because the news cycle has it's gotten so fast paced that if you miss a movie, you know, a month or two later, no one's really even talking about it anymore a lot of the time. Unless it like truly is incredible. And there are sort of these landmark movies in the history of horror, even if it's landmark on a more obscure level when you're talking about some of the deeper subgenres. Um, that other things are paying homage to or referencing or even just taking pieces of it whole cloth. Um, so I think it probably is more important to have a well-established background in the genre than it is to be up to date on every single new thing. But it certainly helps to be able to, you know, understand where the culture is in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings me to question number 4. Well, obviously, I do a lot of tack on questions to the main
No, I love it.
questions.
I'm not in any rush. Let's get them, man.
Well, for this, I want to ask specifically about your podcasting and or podcasting in general and your podcast in particular. But first of all, just the mechanics. You've been doing this over a year now. And just for your fans and people, that hear you seamlessly do it, and you've got a great show and, a natural flow, and you're just
Thank you.
on top of it right away. What are like the challenges of putting on a podcast that, people don't see?
I think that editing is really the most challenging part for me because, first of all, I'm incredibly distractible. And um, so much of my own like hyper focus on making it just so has paid off in people being like, yeah, it sounds really good, but that sort of creates a feedback loop of like, oh no, I can never let it slip. I can never let dead air exist on the show or whatever. And that can be really hard to spend a lot of time going through the editing process when it already takes 5 hours or whatever to watch the movie and research it. Tack on another 5 or whatever to go through on with such a fine-tooth comb. There's a lot of time put into every single episode.
Well, hats off to you. I don't edit my show unless it's, a little bit at the beginning or end, or so I appreciate how much time and effort, goes into that. So how much do you edit? Like, say you have a finished 1 hour show, how much have you cut out to make it 1 hour?
Well, I usually don't edit for content, which helps. I figure unless someone specifically is like, "Hey, I regret saying this. Please take it out." They said it for a
Like
reason.
I hate the It's Alive remake. No,
Right.
kidding. Put that in. Put it in twice.
Yeah, I mean but that is the kind of thing. Like if someone is, just in the conversation, bad mouths another movie, and they're like, maybe it's not fair for me to, smack talk it or whatever. Occasionally I'll take that out, but by and large, it's mostly just like the thinking time, and the ums and likes and stuff. So I would say between 5 and 10 minutes of dead air and ums and likes gets taken out of every episode.
Okay, cool. So you just kind of make it tighter and more consolidated.
Right.
And as a lot of people don't know, even doing that is just laborious. That takes time.
Yeah, because you gotta listen, find the spot, and then in the like audio, the waveform, go through and measure out exactly how much of it needs to be cut and make sure that it still sounds good once that's cut, you know, that it doesn't feel rushed or whatever. It can be challenging for sure.
Once it's edited and posted, up for the world to hear, do you ever go back and listen to your podcasts or study them?
Well, is sometimes some of the like sillier episodes, like we've done a few bonus episodes where we'll like walk through a choose your own adventure book instead of talking about a movie or something. And
Mhm.
you know, we do like silly voices and stuff, and those can be really fun. But some of the older ones I have a hard time listening to just because of like the audio quality and you know, you have the training wheels on and everything. So I wouldn't say that I really go back and listen to those, but you know, I hear it while I'm editing. So I'm not ashamed to admit that I laugh at my own jokes sometimes.
Because after I post one, usually the next day I'll listen to it again, like at least give it a day's rest and
Yeah.
hear it fresh. I don't know. I kind of like to analyze. Not that I'm nitpicking or loving it or hating it, but there's just something about like when you're doing it, it's way different than hearing it after the fact. There's just things that you don't even remember saying something.
Right. No, absolutely.
It's like, oh my God. Or wow, that was a good, train of thought. Or maybe it gives you an idea for like a future episode.
Right.
Because don't you find your guests give you really good ideas?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, like I said, my love for David Lynch literally started because someone picked Lost Highway. So not just ideas for the show, but just in terms of how I engage with media in my personal life.
Hmm. Well, how have you promoted the show? And in the past year, how have you grown your audience?
You know, I throw a lot of things at the wall and see what sticks. I would say it ranges from just, you know, getting my friends to retweet it on social media to hiring Zach Galligan to do a cameo for the episode where we talked about Gremlins and Gremlins 2. So,
Nice.
yeah, it's like, you know, people enjoy it. I don't know if it was worth the money, but at the end of the day, I got Zach Galligan telling people to listen to my podcast. So that's always fun.
I once ran into him in the elevator at a horror convention, and I was afraid to talk to him because I thought he might charge me because everyone charges for their autographs. I thought, am I allowed to even, look at you in the elevator, or is that, against the protocol?
Yeah, I mean, he seemed like a nice guy. I hope he's a nice guy, Zach Galligan. I love the movies you're
Oh,
in.
yeah,
So,
he seemed very nice. No, it's just that I think one of my first horror conventions, I'm just kind of realizing there's all these different ways you can approach them, like at their table.
yeah.
Most of them, charge money, even if you bring your own item for them to sign. And you just get so paranoid, like, uh-oh, am I out of line? Am I, can I only
Yeah,
see them at their table?
it does, you know, it can be tough, especially when it can, I mean, you know, I understand that they're there because it's their job. They're trying to make money. But still, when you try to engage with them on a level of like fan and artist, it can feel a little like a slap in the face when they're like, "Yeah, sure, I'll sign it. Give me $20." It's like, oh man, you know,
Yeah. So how did you approach Zach and get him to do that promo for you?
he's literally on the platform Cameo. So I literally was just like, "Hey man, here's the idea. If you want to do it, I'll pay whatever your rate is." I think I had like a deal, like a Groupon for Cameo, and so it was like $20 to get Zach Galligan to say, "Hey, listen to the show." And I was like, "You know what? I'll take that."
Hey, that's worth it. Why
Yeah.
not?
Right.
I like that idea. I don't know, the whole horror convention thing. I love going to them, but I've always like I don't go up to the tables because I don't want to pay someone for their autograph or feel like a groveling fan.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
at the same time, I want to meet them and say hi. So I think the
Yeah.
only time I kind of just went up to the table without wanting anything, I think Eric Roberts. He was very approachable. He was really nice.
Nice.
And I think he gave me the time of day because um, for some reason had I think a copy of the Coca-Cola Kid on VHS, one of his early movies, and he was kind
Right.
of charmed by that. But a little trivia, the only person I've ever paid for an autograph at a convention, and this was just a year and a half ago, was Cheryl Lee,
Wow, there you go. You know
Laura
what?
Palmer
I would
herself.
I would pay for her autograph, I think.
And it's the kind of thing where for several years they were doing all these Twin Peaks themed appearances at the conventions where, groups of the actors would appear together.
Yeah.
And I think that I'd seen her a few other times, and this is probably the third time. And I said, you know what? I got to bite the bullet this year and go up and meet Cheryl Lee.
Yeah.
And I did. And she was very, very sweet. So, anyways, they say don't meet your idols. Well, she turned out to be one of the nice ones. So, if you're out there, Cheryl Lee, you're very charming. And thank you.
Yeah.
And by the way, you need to be in more starring performances because you're an amazing actor.
Absolutely. Co-signed. And as far as that don't meet your idols thing, it can kind of go either way because there have been a lot of people that I've met through the show who I've reached out to because I'm a fan, and they come on and they're just wonderful. And, I think that a lot of the times it can be like a contextual thing where, they have their own stuff going on, and if you just approach someone on the street, you don't know what is going on in their life right then. And so I think that it is okay to meet your idols as long as it's in the right context. So start a podcast, people, and then you get to meet them.
That's a very good way to do that. So, who's the highest profile person you've lured on your show?
Probably Rich Sommer from Mad Men.
Oh,
And
yeah, I
Summer
saw
of
that. Yeah.
'84. Yeah, he was. Although quote unquote lured him, he actually reached out to me and was like, "Hey, has anyone done Creepshow yet?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Can I do Creepshow?" And I was like, "Sure, Rich Summer, come on the show and we'll talk about Creepshow."
Excellent. So that was the whole thing because he loved Creepshow. But has he done many horror movies as an actor?
He did Summer of '84, which
Okay.
it's pretty good. I think that when the shoe drops, it becomes much better than the beginning, which can kind of feel like a Stranger Things knockoff. But then that shoe drops and it takes a great turn. And if you work in the fashion industry, The Devil Wears Prada could be a horror movie.
Yeah.
And I love it dearly. I think it's a great movie. So
It is. It's one of those guilty pleasures. It's like always on some channel, just playing in a loop continuously somewhere.
hell yeah.
But even if you happen upon and you don't think you're going to sit down and watch it, you just can't help but be sucked in, and you're going to watch the whole thing.
Hell yeah. You got Meryl Streep. You got Stanley Tucci. What's not to love?
Exactly. And you just love it when she says, darn it, okay, I'm going to give in and give this fashion thing a try.
Hell yeah.
And it's like, makeover.
Who doesn't love a makeover montage?
Exactly. Well, I recently wrote an article about how to be a guest on a podcast.
Oh,
And this was for a screenwriting website. So it's to tell screenwriters how to approach a podcast, what to do when you're on it, how to promote yourself, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of interesting to kind of think that down and break it down. And I have to say, I've been very lucky. I've had great guests. You're a great guest. So it's not, it wasn't written out of, having horrible guests to suffer
right.
through. It was more of just to kind of break the ice and tell people how they can be better guests and up their chances of being, on a show and hopefully asked back again.
Right.
So I'm wondering for you, what are the things that make it easier for you to interview someone on your podcast?
I would say that one of the things that makes it easiest for me is sort of an understanding of how film works. There are plenty of episodes where I've just had like my friends on to talk about a movie that they like. And those are great conversations, and I learn a lot about them. And, that's at the end of the day, that's sort of what I was looking to get out of it in the first place. But when you talk with someone who has an understanding of film and the way that it works, and I think that probably screenwriters would have a pretty good understanding of that, it can really help to engage on more than just the surface level of the movie. You know, talking about sort of cinematographical, whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. That kind of decisions.
Cinematography-ish.
Yeah. You know, camera movement decisions, and you know, on a more technical level as opposed to just the aesthetic or whatever. I think can really be helpful.
Hmm. Interesting. You know, for me, I think that's one reason I also listen back to my podcast, because I I hate it when I go or oh, it's like this, or you know,
Mhm.
the new generation. It's kind of like, or it's kind of, or it's like, you know, the unnecessary things, and we all do it.
Mhm.
And I know better, but you know, I still do it too, and I'm, you know, very aware of it. So when I listen back, I try to say, oh, I got to cut down on that. But for me, and I don't know if it's like a generational thing, but it's like a lot of people don't want to commit to finishing a sentence. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And they've already said their idea, but they can't quite just stop talking. So they go, and I don't know if it's nervousness or if they feel like they're the guest, so they just have to constantly fill the air with their talk. It's like, I don't think they realize as a guest, you don't have to talk all the time. You can just finish a thought, shut up, and let the guest ask the next question.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it having been on your side of things, I think it can be difficult to be like, I want to let them talk, but they are just kind of stammering. And when I don't want to cut them off either, you know. So I agree. I think that it can be a challenge, but it does sometimes feel like, oh, am I supposed to keep talking? Like just because the host is being a good host and letting the person finish their thought, it can feel like there is a lingering there where maybe I'm supposed to say something else.
Right. So I don't necessarily fault them, because I think for a lot of people, it's a foreign environment. It's like you're not on a podcast every day. For some people, it's probably their first time.
Yeah.
And there are no, you know, set rules. You know, every host has their own format and their own kind of tone to the show.
Right.
But especially if you want to make a point about something, like say you're really fighting to tell, this is why I love this movie, you make your point better sometimes if you just talk more briefly. You know, sometimes the more you talk doesn't necessarily state your case better.
Hey man, Shakespeare had it right. Brevity is the soul of wit.
The other thing I wish people would do more, this just in general, is speak in concrete terms. Like, you know, instead of saying, oh, this was so cool, you know, say the thing why it was cool, you know, personalize it, just say specific nouns and words as opposed to just, you know, a general uh, sludge kind of phrase.
Yeah.
Here I am breaking my own rules now by stammering. Not saying anything. So I know how hard it is. It's not like I'm attacking people, but I think if people want to come across in a certain way, like being knowledgeable and confident, sometimes just shorter sentences or a string of shorter sentences come up for air every now and then. But people forget what you say unless you give them more images in your talk. Like, you know, instead of saying, "Oh, it was scary," you know, "Oh, I love the blood red cinematography."
Hmm.
"Oh, when the hand came out from behind the bush, it made me jump in my seat." You know, it's kind
Classic. I love that scene where the hand comes from behind the bush.
of the classic hand behind the bush technique. But I don't know. You're the first person I've gotten that off my chest with. Of I want my guests to feel comfortable and to, you know, have a good time, but I also want them to appear intelligent to the audience. I mean, I want to put them in their best light.
Yeah.
So I would love to, you know, arm them with the tools that'll make them seem really cool to the audience.
Hey man, I'm here for it.
Oh my God. See, now there needs to be a whole Facebook group for this. How to whip your podcast guests into shape instantly. Oh
Number
my
one
God.
technique for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, before we get off this podcasting thing and this guesting thing, I kind of slipped in make your guests comfortable, but that's not totally true. Do you know who the photographer Annie Leibovitz is?
Certainly.
So all these people are doing these master classes that they advertise on, YouTube and Facebook. You just can't get away from it.
Yeah, I
Even Mark.
actually watched the David Lynch one.
Oh, cool. And I think Scorsese does one, and Helen Mirren.
Steve Martin,
Well,
I think, did one too.
okay. And I think Annie Leibovitz did one. She did one someplace. I'm pretty sure it was that masterclass thing.
Mhm.
And I saw the little preview for it, and she said that something to the effect of she used to think that her job as a photographer was to make her subject feel comfortable. And she says she doesn't think that anymore. And I was so taken by that. Because I used to think, oh, my job as host is to make my guest feel comfortable. Then I thought, well, what if I don't bend over backwards to make them feel comfortable? What if we even have some moments of discomfort early on and the guest learns how to get over that by themselves?
Yeah, I think that there is something to that, especially in a discussion like these. When I'm talking to someone, even though I'm agreeing with them that it is the best horror movie ever made, we don't always agree on every single thing. And by challenging each other, I think it forces you to think about why you're feeling that way or why you connect with this piece of the film. And it can draw out more of the conversation and get in depth a little bit more, as opposed to just that surface level stuff that you were talking about of, oh, it scared me. Oh, I liked it. If someone challenges you on that and you have to think, why did I like this? How can I come back at them and prove why it's good? I think that can certainly help improve the conversation.
Yeah. And I'm leaning now towards not trying to change people's opinions, you know, just listening, letting someone have their thoughts, their opinion, and just letting go of the need to bring them to my side.
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, especially with the way that social media is right now, there is that confrontation level where everyone has to be on your side or else you're cast out to the wolves. And, um, it can be hard to sort of shake that. And I think it is important to do, though, because, you don't have to agree on everything. And especially something as, it feels messed up to be like movies aren't important, but something as unimportant as movies, who really cares if we disagree about something on it?
In this day and age, pop culture is so important to people, especially movies. It's almost like, and I don't want to sound pretentious, but I'm sure people, much smarter than I am talk about this stuff, but, you know, our pop culture is like our religion. The bands we love are sacred. The
Mhm.
movies we love are sacred to us. And when someone challenges that, it really affects a lot of us.
Yeah, I one of the things that really, really frustrates me is that people people have sort of become the things that they like, in that they view it as a piece of themselves. And so if you say, I don't like this piece of media, to them, what you're saying is, I don't like this piece of you.
Hmm.
And that can feel bad for people who have sort of accepted this media into their life this way. And I think that a lot of that, unfortunately, has to do with the saturation of advertising and stuff. You know, when you're able to have these things, I mean, gosh, I look at like Bounty paper towels that are coated in Star Wars stuff. And I'm like, do we really need Star Wars paper towels? And if I say that, people who like Star Wars go, yeah, I need Star Wars paper towels. Why are you attacking me like this? People have really they're not willing to accept critiques of the media itself and not view it as an attack on them, which it can just really be frustrating to me.
Well, are people forgetting that you don't have to react to everything?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I think people do forget that. There are so many times where I hold my tongue on Twitter. Everyone feels like they need to comment on every single thing. And it's okay to just let it rush off your back. Not everyone needs people don't need to hear every single opinion that I have. I am not so hubristic to feel that way, that my voice is the end all be all. And so sometimes I just don't talk about things. If someone is out there praising a movie that I didn't like, I don't have to go into their comments and be like, actually, you're an idiot. This movie sucks. Who's that helping? I think that. Clearly they're not going to think that. Why should I try and bring them down in that way?
Do you spend much time on Reddit?
I used to. And over the years that has diminished a lot. I think that the quality of conversation on there can be less than ideal, especially when you try and create a discussion about something or post original content or whatever, and it just sinks to the bottom, and then you go to like our horror and, oh my god, I finally watched John Carpenter's The Thing, and wow, is at the top of the boards with 20,000 upvotes or whatever. It just, to be a little coarse or a little blue, the Reddit circle jerk is a real phenomenon, and that also frustrates me.
Yeah, when our self-image becomes counting how many people liked our comment.
Right.
What is that? I mean, that's just so weird.
I hate it, frankly. I think it sucks.
And it also brings it down to this lowest common denominator. I don't go on there much, but sometimes I'll see really cool, well thought out comments that get no attention or likes, and they're just the most stupid, predictable comment. It's just everyone without thinking likes it because it's just the lowest common denominator, no brain kind of comment.
Yeah, I mean, people's attention spans are lower, and so the idea of having to read a well thought and well constructed argument is a lot less appealing to a lot of people than I liked the thing that you liked. Upvote, done, endorphin rush.
Endorphin rush. And the thing is, most horror fans I've met are pretty intelligent. They're well read. They know about things other than just horror, and they really like to discuss it intellectually.
Yeah, I would agree with that on a like face-to-face basis. I think that in not just with horror, but in any group where it just becomes sort of a faceless mass, um, it's hard to have a well thought out conversation because you can't get the tone quite right when you're just reading text, and maybe you make some typos, or you can't think about your words as much when you're just trying to bang them out onto a keyboard. Um, yeah, I agree, but I think that that's not the platform for it.
No, that's why if you can find, a couple friends who like what you like,
Right.
that's pretty precious. If you want to get in depth and not be insulted, one or two people you can talk to in person or on the phone is more satisfying than 1,000 hostile strangers online.
Absolutely. Especially because you get to know them and you can understand sort of the context of their decisions or their choices or whatever. If I talk to someone who doesn't like David Lynch and I'm like, hey, I loved this movie, it reminds me of David Lynch, and he's like, oh, I don't like it for exactly that reason, I'm not going to get upset because I understand that this is typical for them. They don't connect with that. And when you don't have that kind of knowledge of the people out there, it can be a lot easier to misinterpret something.
Along the same lines of, oh, that's so David Lynch, when clearly it's not, and you can tell they just know nothing of what makes Lynch Lynch. I
Yes.
equally hate it when people go, oh, that's so John Waters. It's like, no, it's not. John Waters is not a catchphrase for something mildly campy or, out there. It's like they have no idea. And I don't know,
It's a
bless them for
buzzword. It becomes a
trying.
buzzword.
It's a buzzword and it's a shorthand, but it can become a laziness.
Yeah.
And like for people who dismissed all slasher films without knowing all the nuances, there is a difference between Michael Myers and Jason and
Yeah.
Freddy.
Right.
They each have its own special world that they exist in, and different people like them for different reasons.
Absolutely. And I think that they do exist in different worlds and they do all bring something different. And just because you like one doesn't mean you can't like the others because of that variety. Again, I think that's part of what makes horror so special, that even within the subgenre of slasher, which is already broken out from larger horror, I mean, I just think it's beautiful that we have that variety.
All right, question 5, which in reality is like question 50. But I'm just so glad you aren't playing a drinking game with this.
You can't see. You don't know.
Can you imagine by this point? Okay, although I will say, here's a pointer on podcasting: never drink while you're podcasting. People think it'll loosen them up. No, you'll just slur your words and sound stupid.
Yes, I will say that there has been like 1 or 2 episodes where I had a drink or two, and hey, if you're a listener out there, see if you can find them.
Well, I normally do my podcast before dinner, either earlier in the day or late afternoon, but I did one after dinner for some reason. That's the only time the person could do it. So I'm doing the podcast, and then I'm like, half an hour into it, then I realized, oh my God, I had a couple glasses of wine with dinner. Oh my God, am I slurring my words? I'm feeling a little buzzed here. And then I looked over at the table and said, I'm still drinking wine. What's going on here? But I guess I was not feeling any pain. But the minute I realized that, I was so hyper aware of, don't slur my words. Don't slur my words.
Yeah,
I made it through somehow.
Nice. Yeah, it can be. It can force you to dwell on it, I think, especially because, speaking of smoking, occasionally when I am stressed about a recording or something, I'll smoke a little before, and sometimes it pays off and I get distracted and don't think about what's coming up. And sometimes you just get in your own head. And so taking that risk is not something that is always advisable. So I certainly agree that coming to a recording sober and clear-headed is certainly beneficial to both the guest and the host.
And especially you, being younger, you have more brain cells, but when you get older, you just need to put every advantage on your side. So
make sure they're all working at peak capacity.
Do you take a lot of notes before your show? Do you look at notes?
Yes, I write a bonkers amount of notes, frankly.
Excellent. Because I like to research. I mean, I feel bad if I don't research something, at least, if it's not for a half an hour before the call, but hopefully, the day before.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. As I would say that, like, as I develop I guess it's like sort of a script for the episode, or at least for my portions of it, because since we do like break down the movies by like theme and plot and everything, I sort of develop the script as I'm watching the movie, where I'll be like, oh, this part is really standing out to me because it connects back to something that was earlier in the movie or whatever. And so I'll pause the movie and I'll start writing about why that portion of the movie is connecting with me. And then after I'm done, I'll go and start doing research into the background of it and stuff, and sort of add that to it. So it sort of comes together over the entire process, instead of just being like, okay, I'm sitting down to take notes and then I'm going to watch the movie or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I decided early on was during interviews to not Google things, to not be online. Someone says something, then go to Google and look it up.
Right.
Because wanting to be in the moment, and also just to challenge myself to think, okay, can I think of this in my own brain without Google?
I respect the hell out of that.
Yeah, and I think only once did I do that, and it's because the person was just really wanting to know the answer to something. So while they were talking about something else, I secretly looked it up and found a name because I just couldn't get past. They were so stuck on they had to know this name they couldn't remember.
Hey, I've been there. You get hung up.
Oh, totally. Okay, fifth and final question. So these don't have to be your favorites, but on your show, Best Little Whorehouse in Philly, another plug for you. What are some films that you hope some future guests will want to discuss? And again, not because they're necessarily your favorite, but you think they would be really fun to dissect.
Oh man, I have two answers right off the bat for you, and it's partially because they are some of my favorites. And the first answer is Friday the 13th Part 2, because
Okay.
I really think that as much as there are slashers that maybe swing for more of a fence than Friday the 13th Part 2 does, I think that is like peak slasher for me. I think Jason is scary in it, and he is not. That's not always the case down the road. I think that the characters, like the bodies, if you will, the counselors, are still likable, which is important to me. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, I just want them to get stacked up, and I want to root against them and root for the killer." But for me, a lot of the fun is in rooting for these people to get out of it. And I think that Ginny, as portrayed by Amy Steele, is just the best final girl. She's smart, she's capable, she's funny. It's just fantastic, and I think the designs are great. Everything about that movie is just really working for me.
It has such a great opening scene too. Back at home.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it kind of sucks that actress was kind of misled on her role in the movie, but I do think that it really comes together incredibly well. And again, it is sort of like I don't need to question every single thing where people are like, "Well, why did he track her down and how did he track her down?" And it's like, who cares? He did it. Just accept it.
Right, right. And it's also like you're saying, Jason finally, is propelling it. It's finally
Right.
the first, Jason killer movie.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that element of the surprise of Pamela at the end of the first one, but I like Jason. I like him being out there and being a buff little weird frog boy. I just think it's great. But my other answer, and not to drag you out here even longer than we're already going, but I love, love, love Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris. I think it is spectacular. I think that it asks questions that really affected the way that I thought. It's first of all, it's incredibly beautiful. I love the way that those ponderous Soviet movies look. And it sort of exists as like a mirror to 2001: A Space Odyssey, but where that movie is like hopeful about humanity sort of escaping the bounds of Earth and it beyond ourselves as well. Solaris asks, how can you love anyone when you can't even really know them, you idiot? Like that to me, I sat there after I watched it and I went, oh my God, this movie's right. You can't know anyone. Even you can barely even know yourself with the amount of subconscious thought that's going on. And so constantly, all you can know of other people is what they show you. And there's an element of constantly having to question what's going on behind the other people's eyes and in their mind. And this movie manages to raise and ask these incredibly difficult questions while still executing in a way that is unsettling and absolutely stunning looking. I just think it's incredible. I highly recommend people go check it out if they have 3 hours to spare.
I was going to say it's a long movie, and was that in theaters, or was that like a mini series? How did they make a 3 hour movie?
It was just out in theaters, you know. The Russian premiere was like, go ahead and make this movie, man.
So it's like the old fashioned ones that used to have like an intermission in the middle.
Yeah, no such luck with this one, unfortunately. You just
Okay.
got to sit there and soak in it.
So that's when back in the day I'd always see the VHS of that in the store, like it was a double tape set.
Yeah.
I thought, what is this? Should I watch it? Now, what did you think of the remake?
I think it's okay. I think that sort of Russian ponderousness that I mentioned is really beneficial to the original one because it lets you sort of think on the questions that it's asking. You know, George Clooney, he's very handsome and I think he's a very good actor, but I don't think that he was the right choice for that role. And I think that speaking of Steven Soderbergh, because he's the one who directed that, you know, it's not really his kind of movie either. He kind of treats it a little bit more actiony, and he turns it into a little bit more of just your typical sort of space thriller, as opposed to this deep existential dread that's in the original.
Are you an Aronofsky fan?
Yeah, I guess. I think he has his moments for me.
Is he horror? Is he art house horror? What is he?
Man, what a good question. I think that he is a horror director. I think that a lot of it is, you know, he has that surreal moments and stuff like Black Swan, which I like. And he sort of tackles the horror of reality in Requiem for a Dream. You know, I think that downward spiral and the perils of addiction are horrific. And, you know, just because it's not fantastical doesn't make it not a horror movie for me. I haven't seen Mother, I admit. It just didn't really seem up my alley. And I hear there are horrific moments in that as well. So I'm willing to give him the title of horror director.
See, I wish you would have on your show occasionally. It doesn't have to break your whole mold. Here I am redoing your whole show. People who, you know, kind of like what I was saying, you want to like a movie, and not even that you're disappointed with it, but just movies that they're not your favorite, but you've got so much to say about them.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. Sometimes, so one that jumps to mind is the Slither episode because the guest picked it and then we didn't talk about it before the podcast episode. And he came on and he said, by the way, this didn't hold up as well as I thought it would from the last
Oh,
time that I
interesting.
saw it. And so that really kind of put me on my back foot. And it kind of reshifts the conversation in an interesting way. It's certainly, I think, a good episode. If I didn't think it was a good episode, I wouldn't have put it out. But it certainly does feel different than a lot of the other episodes.
How about a love-hate episode? Like a movie, you love part of it and you hate part of it.
Maybe, you know, there's all kinds of roads that this show could travel down. I think that's what makes it so exciting.
Or how about the love to hate episode? Like a movie you hate so much, you watch it over and over just to hate it.
Maybe. Hey, I don't. What would that even be for me? I don't know.
Has a horror movie just ever made you angry?
Yes, and that movie is Hellfest. I have never felt so much like a movie was made by just a corporate committee. You know, every single thing just reeks of 1,000 suits who don't care about horror in that movie. Like the Killer's theme song is royalty free Pop Goes the Weasel. And the ending is so desperate for a sequel. And all of the teenagers who are supposed to be our protagonists have the same annoying voice, and it's all, you can tell it's the same guy who wrote it. None of them feel distinct, and they're just all trash humans. They are garbage. I hate them so much. And just none of it is working for me. I'm so embarrassed for Tony Todd that he had to take that movie. Like he's
Uh,
so good, and he's good. He's the only good thing in that movie. He brings his Tony Toddness to it, and there was no way for him to salvage it.
oh no. Home invasion movies, love or hate?
Has to be done well, and I am pretty uncomfortable with like rape revenge kind of subgenre within home invasion. So I have a tough time with stuff like Straw Dogs, but stuff like The Strangers I like. Just a little bit more straightforward home invasion kind of stuff.
I think as once one becomes a money-making hit, people realize, oh, there's only one location. This is cheaper to shoot.
Right.
I don't know why. I just, some things you just have an aversion to and you don't know why.
Yeah.
For some reason, the home invasion, it's just never clicked with me.
Hey, I get it, honestly.
Because at a certain point, okay, you want things to be horrifying, but you also want to enjoy being in this location with these people at this moment.
Right.
And then some of these, I don't know what the line that gets crossed is. You just don't find any enjoyment in it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it can be fun to feel some of that despair, but some of those movies kind of let it exist for a little too long, they just really beat you down the same way that they're beating down the victims. And part of the issue becomes a home invasion movie is almost by definition much more grounded in reality than some of the more fantastical stuff. And so just watching humans at their worst is not really as enjoyable to me as watching like a monster movie or something.
Well, like one that was really controversial, Eden Lake,
I haven't seen that one.
which just has despicable people. And at a certain point, it's just so, I'm not going to say realistic, but it's relentless. There's just no hope in it. And then at a
Yeah,
certain point, you're wondering, what enjoyment are you getting out of watching it?
yeah, and I think that with something like Funny Games, where the director is actively trying to be like, you shouldn't like this, you sick bastards. Like, I don't. If you don't like it, I don't like it. I don't like that this director feels better than me because he thinks that I get off on the violence or whatever. And it just that kind of thing is really on display in a home invasion movie, which is why I think it is such a fine line to balance on.
Okay, pet peeve in horror movies, the Netherworld. And I just had a discussion with someone about this the other day. Like in Insidious, they got that great demon, and early on he's so scary and he shocks you. And even though he looks like that other character from Star Wars, but then it all falls apart at the end when the little boy is in that little netherworld that he rules over. It's like this kind of little hell.
Yeah.
And the dad has to go save him or something. And the minute a movie enters a netherworld, it ruins everything that came before it. It's jumping the shark. Suddenly, there's no mystery in the netherworld.
Right. Yeah, I can understand that. I think that my pet peeve is as simple as just CGI blood because it's so easy to just mix corn syrup and food coloring, and
Yeah.
CGI blood never ever looks good. And
It doesn't.
even if you manage to pull it off and just be like you can't even tell that it's CGI blood, it's still like just make the friggin' corn syrup blood, guys. It's not that hard. And I think that it would really be beneficial to a lot of movies just to take that little step.
And then in episode 1 of season 2 of Stranger Things, when after all that happened in season 1, and the girl gets out of that netherworld, like in 10 minutes, she's out, and I guess, her sacrifice meant nothing.
Yeah, it does
That pissed
sort
me
of suck
off.
the wind
I
out of it.
stopped I stopped watching Stranger Things after that. That pissed me off so much.
Hey,
Do you
I
watch
understand.
Stranger Things?
I did not finish season 3. I watched all of season 2, and I thought it was okay. I think that there are one or two changes I would make. I think the easiest fix is um, there's like an episode where 11 like goes to Chicago and gets a makeover and becomes this badass. And then the next episode, we see our main group sort of dealing with this struggle, and then she shows up at the end and she saves them. And if they had just switched the order of those two episodes, you know, all of a sudden you get this great cliffhanger of 11 shows up looking completely different and much more self-confident, and you're like, oh wow, I wonder how this happened. And then you get the backstory episode instead of just going in chronological order and just being like, okay, I'm just here for the ride. It's sort of simple things like that where I'm like, okay, they had the success and now it's maybe less about the artistic integrity, which feels very pretentious of me to say, but it's how I feel.
Mm-hmm. Well, has all this retro 80s stuff worn out its welcome?
Yeah, I'm ready for 90s nostalgia now. Let's do it. I'm ready for the next stage.
Still like rave slasher movies.
Hell, I look,
What
hey,
was the 90s? What defined the 90s even?
um, I'm thinking like some. Well, actually, I was wondering. I was gonna say Blade. Is that 99 or is that 2001?
It's probably late 90s,
I think
I
it
would
is
think.
late 90s. I think that Blade rules. I think that if we can get some more of this like unabashed, goofy fun that doesn't have to be so wrapped up in the trappings of the era, I think that would be delightful.
Jean-Claude Van Damme, he put out a lot of movies in the 90s.
Hell yeah, he did.
That was kind of his golden era.
Let's get another Hard Target out here.
So that was great. I loved Hard Target. Saw it in the theater when it came out.
Hell yeah, 93. Great year.
Oh my god, I saw Cyborg in the theater when it came out.
Jean-Claude, we're here for you, man.
Oh my god. See, I just now that's like the final nail in the coffin of movie theaters in general. I mean, are you afraid that they just won't reopen?
Here's my thing is that I am not really worried about the big chains because the buildings are already built in such a way that somebody will come along and scoop them up and turn it into another movie theater, no matter where it is, I think. My concern is for some of the smaller venues. I am donating to the Philadelphia Film Society theaters because I want them to be around and I want them to be able to show independent film. Um, and so I do worry a little bit about them, especially because they are losing a lot of that the power in the relationship with studios. We see WB just going right to home streaming, and those theaters already were not always playing the kind of movies where you need a huge screen, but there is still a great element of the audience participation in like this ritual that we're all going through. So I do worry a little bit, but I also don't know what the alternative is. Our studio's just not supposed to put out movies for another year or whatever. We just don't know what's going to be happening with COVID. And I don't think that it's smart to just backlog stuff for so long because then you're going to be putting out stuff that's competing on way too high of a level with too much other stuff. And things will slip through the cracks anyway. So yeah, it's kind of just like I don't know what the alternative is.
Well, here's the irony of it. Like where I live, there's still an operating movie theater. They have 3 screens, and they are operating right now. That I think, you think of that as a summer thing, but here it is December, and they're showing films, and that's like the only, social distanced approved, place you can show movies right now.
Yeah.
Isn't that ironic? Just to think that this would be like some weird dystopian future where all the theaters close except this resurgence of drive-ins, and that's the only place you can see a live movie.
Hey, you know what? I would love for them to come back. It's certainly challenging because in a city you don't want to drive everywhere, and it's hard to find the space for a drive-in theater. But I don't begrudge other areas having them, and I love to visit them, and sure, bring back, long live the drive-in.
And I loved how they were actually playing Black Christmas.
Hell yeah,
Isn't that kind of cool?
I love it.
Oh my God. Well, now we're finally going to wrap up, but I want to give you the last word here. And I think the last word should be, and I'm just defaulting to this because we're almost to 2021. But hey, sometimes it's good to go for the obvious. So going into 2021, how would you like to see the horror community embrace the new normal? If we do have to still quarantine or not see, movies in theaters, but how can we still have a good experience with it without, succumbing to angry people on Twitter?
I think that a good way to make that happen is for people to check out virtual film festivals. I think that it's a really exciting thing to do because, sure, sometimes you see some crap, but sometimes you get to see some really incredible stuff that it would be hard to find a distributor for. And getting to look at a lot of these smaller movies is something that I think is really bonding in a really great way. We can sit there and argue all day about the Friday the 13th lawsuit and if they should be bringing it back, or even you and I could talk about the Halloween remake for forever or whatever. But
Mhm.
these little movies that are so much more of a passion project a lot of the time, I think that they deserve more eyes on them, and that they lend themselves to discussion in a really great way, because it's less about making money and more about that artistic expression. And if people can engage with these movies on that level, I think that the conversations that we're having would just be a lot better.
Mm-hmm. And since you're getting so good at luring people to your show now, especially celebrities, in 2021, what celebrity, and it doesn't have to be a mega superstar, but some known industry person to have on your show, and what movie would you like to discuss with them?
Oh boy, I think that it would be either Matt Gorley or Paul Rust, because Paul Rust is probably the more well known of them. He was the star and writer of that show Love on Netflix. But he's also an incredible comedian, which is how I know him primarily. And their show, in Voorhees We Trust, with Gorley and Rust, is not only an incredible podcast that I love listening to, but it's also a huge inspiration for my show in terms of being a welcoming environment, being very positive about things. And they consider themselves to be easy listening podcast. And I think that that's a great discussion, but they're also incredibly insightful. They're involved in the movie industry, so they have that knowledge. And they just seem like swell guys, and I would love to get to talk about one of the Friday the 13th.
Interesting. Now, which number is Jason Lives?
Jason Lives is 6, I believe.
Oh, it's 6 into it. Okay. I just love the opening scene with the big lightning rod that resurrects him.
Yeah, it's a good one. That's a little bit of a controversial movie, just because not everyone likes the comedy that got put into it, but I think it's fun. It's probably like my third favorite of the series. I like 2 and I like 4 a lot.
And see, I hate to break this to you, but I do not hate Jason Goes to Hell.
That's the only one that I dislike.
The one I hate is number 10, Jason in Space.
What? Cronenberg's in it. The head smash kill.
One of my big pet peeves is when movies are too dark. And I just can't tell what's going on.
Literally too dark.
Yeah, when just it's so underlit.
Yeah, it has issues in the lighting department, to be sure.
And
Like I don't think it's a good. See, this is the kind of thing where I don't think it's a good movie, but its flaws bring me closer to it, and I can love it in spite of the flaws. And I don't. I got into this discussion with one of my friends recently about the movie Cats from 2019, and he said something very similar to what you said earlier about how, like, if you like something, then it's good. And
yeah,
I don't think that that's always the case, because objectively, Cats is not a good movie. It looks like shit. And, there are parts of it that are good. I think some of the music is good, but like the scale is going all over the place and the CGI abominations look awful. And it's in spite of these things that I love it. And maybe even because it's not perfect that I love it. And so to claim that it's something it's not, I think it does the movie a disservice. And so something like the Jason X, I would never be like, this is the best movie I've ever seen, but I certainly have fun watching it. So I don't know. It's not perfect, but it's hard. It's a miracle that any movie gets made, really.
it is. And I mean, that's been so many years since I saw it. I think part of it was so jarring to put it in a different setting, not at a
Yeah.
summer camp.
Right.
I
Hey,
mean,
you do get the virtual summer camp though at the
there
end.
you go. Although, they did bring Jason to Manhattan, so that took him out of the ordinary too, which I don't hate that one either. I actually like um what is it? Jason Takes Manhattan.
Yeah, number 8. He goes to,
Number
well, it's
8.
it's really Toronto, but they
Or
claim it's Manhattan.
Toronto. Because
And
that had good kills. I mean, it was
oh yeah, he
straightforward
punches that guy's
slasher.
head off.
Yeah, and it was well lit. I could see what was going on for the first time. Maybe that's it. I just like really well lit horror films.
Hey, it's a big thing that people don't think about very often. It is important.
So, how can people find your podcast online?
We're on all major podcast platforms, so if you just look up the best little horror house in Philly, you'll find us. I mean, if you want to go to Twitter, Little Horror PHL, I'll be constantly talking about the show there, as well as my other random thoughts. But yeah, I mean, those are the main places.
Now, do you have a catchphrase for your show?
The best little horror house in Philly, the show where we talk about the best horror movie ever made, according to our guest, at least.
That's a lot to say in one breath.
Yeah, well, you get used to it.
And your background art for it kind of evokes all your logo kind of looks like Friday the 13th.
That was pretty deliberate, I will admit.
Well, it's very effective because you can look at it and you instantly know what you're in for with your show. Where with mine, I don't know. I still feel like it's kind of vague. Although at least I wanted to show the kind of lo-fi aspect, and that's the thing. There's so many podcasts out there now, and people are going through directories looking at hundreds and thousands of choices. If you don't catch them in like a split second, they'll just pass you by.
I hear you, brother.
Well, you're very good at your branding. You're very good at your hosting. And I could say now, you're very good at guesting.
Well, I appreciate all 3 of those very nice compliments.
Well, his name is George Heftler. He was not born in, but he is now a proud resident of Philly.
Hell yeah.
And his show, which I'm really going to plug, is called The Best Little Horror House in Philly. Really enjoyed having you on, and hopefully I can have you back on in the future.
Would love that. Thanks for having me.